Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into one of history's most haunting yet peaceful worlds. A world where darkness wasn't just the absence of light, but a living, breathing presence that shaped every heartbeat, every footstep, every whispered prayer. Where are you right now? Are you tucked in bed with your phone glowing softly in the dark? Maybe with a nightlight casting gentle shadows across your room? That tiny bit of light you take for granted. In medieval times, that would have been a luxury worth more than gold. Before we step into the cold stone corridors of a 13th century castle, I'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button. It really helps me continue creating these bedtime history stories for you. I am genuinely curious about where you are joining me from tonight. Are you in a cozy apartment in London, a farmhouse in Nebraska, or maybe a modern home in Tokyo? Wherever you are, I want you to do something for me. Dim those lights, get comfortable under your blankets, and for the next few hours, let's travel back 700 years to experience something most people today can never truly imagine. Absolute, complete darkness. What if I told you that the darkness medieval people experienced was so profound, so total, that modern humans literally cannot comprehend it? According to Dr. Roger E. Kirch's groundbreaking research at Virginia Tech, the darkness that descended on medieval Europe each night was what he calls compressed darkness, a blackness so dense that people described it as having weight, as pressing down on them like a physical force. Think about that for a moment. Darkness with weight, darkness you could feel on your skin, darkness so complete that extending your hand in front of your face revealed absolutely nothing. Now imagine standing in a castle corridor at midnight. No streetlights bleeding through windows, no glow from your phone, no LED clock displays, no light pollution washing out the stars, no refrigerator hum with its little bulb, no exit signs, no standby lights on electronics, nothing, and I mean nothing. The darkness was so absolute that people who experienced it described feeling as though they'd gone blind. Your eyes would strain so hard trying to see something, anything, that they'd actually begin to ache. This wasn't just inconvenient. According to medieval medical texts analysed by Dr. Nancy Cirazi at Hunter College, physicians believed that prolonged exposure to complete darkness could actually damage the eyes and the mind. Now imagine being responsible for keeping hundreds of people safe in that darkness. That was the job of the night watchman, and tonight I am going to take you inside their extraordinary world. The story I am about to share with you isn't just about one man walking dark corridors. It is about an entire civilization that organized itself around the terror and mystery of night. It is about how human beings survived, worked, loved, and fought in conditions we can barely imagine. Tonight, you'll meet actual watchmen whose names appear in medieval court records, whose stories have been preserved in castle account books, whose fears and courage shaped how we think about safety and security even today. You'll discover why churches kept roosters, and it is not the reason you think. You'll learn why bedroom doors had special locks you've never seen in museums. You'll understand why certain staircases spiral in specific directions, a detail that saved countless lives during night attacks. You'll learn about the sophisticated systems of bells, passwords, and patrol routes that made medieval castles some of the most secure structures ever built. And you'll understand why, according to Professor Christopher Dyer from the University of Leicester, the night watchman was considered the most psychologically demanding job in the entire medieval social structure, more stressful than being a soldier, more demanding than being a knight. We're going to walk every single hour of the night, from that moment when the last candle is snuffed out in the Great Hall, through the terrifying depth of midnight when evil was believed to be at its strongest, all the way to that blessed moment when the first grey light touches the eastern towers and roosters begin their ancient announcement that humanity has survived another night. We'll hear what the watchmen heard, the settling of stones, the scurrying of rats, the distant howl of wolves, the whisper of conspiracies. We'll feel what they felt, the bone-deep cold, the weight of responsibility, the constant alertness that never quite allows for rest even when resting, and we'll understand why they described their job not as guarding the castle, but as holding back the night. Now, here is something that might surprise you, something that completely changed how historians understand medieval architecture. When scholars analyze medieval castle records, account books, construction documents, they've discovered something remarkable that contradicts everything we thought we knew about castles. According to research by Dr. Charles Colson from Cambridge University, published in his groundbreaking 2003 study of castle architecture, medieval castles weren't primarily designed to keep enemies out. They were designed to keep people safe during the night. Let that sink in for a second. All those massive walls that could be 20 feet thick at the base, those iron-bound doors that took 4 men to close, those tiny windows barely large enough for a cat to squeeze through, those towers that cost fortunes to build. The primary purpose of all that stone, all that iron, all that engineering genius wasn't military defense against invading armies. It was protection from what happened when the sun went down. Think about the implications of that. It means medieval people feared the night more than they feared enemy armies. It means darkness was considered a greater threat than war. And when you understand the medieval night, you'll understand why. Let me paint you a picture. A very specific picture based on actual historical records. It is October in the year 1284. We're in Caernarfon Castle in Wales, one of the most formidable fortresses ever constructed by human hands. King Edward built this castle as part of his iron ring of fortifications to control Wales, and no expense was spared. The walls are faced with limestone brought all the way from the quarries of Anglesey. The towers are topped with distinctive polygonal turrets that mirror the walls of Constantinople, a deliberate echo of imperial Rome. This isn't just a castle, it is a statement of power carved in stone. The castle is home to about 300 people at this particular moment in time, knights sworn to the king's service, men at arms who garrison the walls, servants who keep the massive household running, craftsmen who maintain the endless repairs stone buildings require, merchants who've been given permission to establish shops within the walls, women, children, animals. It is a complete functioning community, a medieval town folded inside stone walls. As the sun begins to set on this October evening, something remarkable happens. The entire castle transforms. What was a bustling community of commerce and conversation, of shouting and laughter, and the everyday sounds of human life, becomes something else entirely. Something quieter, something more careful, something more careful, something more afraid. Our guide for tonight is a man named Thomas of Brecon. He is 34 years old, which by medieval standards makes him middle-aged but still in his prime. He has been the chief night watchman at Caernarfon for 7 years. His name appears 1947 times in the castle's account books, which have miraculously survived to this day and are now held at the National Archives in London. Thomas is real. His story is real. His paychecks are documented. His existence is not speculation or imagination. And tonight, we're going to live one complete night through his eyes. Thomas earns 4 pence per night, which according to economic historian Dr. Christopher Dyer's careful analysis of medieval wages and purchasing power, is equivalent to about $180 in today's money. That might not sound like much for putting your life on the line every single night, but here is the thing that tells you everything about how dangerous and demanding this job was considered. It is 4 times what a regular guard earns during the day. 4 times. A regular day guard might earn 1 penny for a 12-hour shift. Thomas earns 4 pence for a 14-hour night shift. Why such a dramatic difference? Because what Thomas does between sunset and sunrise is considered so dangerous, so psychologically taxing, so critical to everyone's survival, that the castle's constable considers him literally irreplaceable. In 7 years, Thomas hasn't missed a single night of work, not one. When he was sick with fever 3 years ago, burning up and barely able to stand, he still walked his rounds. delirious but determined because there was no one else who could do it. When his wife gave birth to their second child, he left her side at sundown and returned at dawn, missing those precious first hours of his daughter's life. When his father died last winter, he attended the burial in the morning and was back at the castle by sunset. The night watch waits for no man, not even for joy, not even for grief, not even for love. Let me tell you what is in Thomas's leather satchel as he prepares for tonight's watch, because every single item tells a story about medieval life and medieval fear. According to detailed inventories preserved in castle account books and analysed by museum curators at the British Museum, a night watchman's equipment was carefully standardised and regularly inspected. These weren't random items thrown together. This was a carefully designed survival kit. First, there is a lantern, but this isn't anything like a modern flashlight. Nothing like the powerful lead torch you might keep in your car. This is a small iron box about the size of a large grapefruit with a single tallow candle inside. The sides of the box have holes punched in them to let light out, but those holes are small to protect the flame from wind. Instead of glass panels, which would be impossibly expensive, the box has thin sheets of horn, scraped so thin they're translucent. A sheep's horn, carefully processed, can be split and flattened and scraped until it is almost transparent, letting light through while protecting the flame. That single candle will burn for approximately 90 minutes before it needs replacing. Thomas has 6 more candles in his satchel. Do the math with me. That is 7 candles total. 7 candles times 90 minutes each gives him 630 minutes of light. That is 10.5 hours. His shift is 14 hours long, from sunset at around 6 in the evening to sunrise at around 8 in the morning. This means there will be 3.5 hours of his shift, maybe more, where Thomas must navigate the castle by memory, by touch, by sound alone, walking through complete darkness, checking doors in complete darkness, investigating suspicious sounds in complete darkness. Think about what that means for his mental state. For 3.5 hours, Thomas will be functionally blind, walking through a building that houses 300 people and has hundreds of rooms, dozens of staircases, multiple levels, and countless places where an enemy could hide. The psychological strength required to do this night after night is almost incomprehensible to modern people who've never experienced true darkness. Second, there is a wooden rattle attached to his belt. At first glance, this looks like a child's toy, a simple piece of carved wood with a handle and a toothed wheel. But this is Thomas's alarm system, his emergency broadcast, his last line of defense when everything goes wrong. When spun rapidly by rotating the handle, the wooden gear scrapes across a stiff piece of wood, making a harsh chattering sound that can be heard throughout the entire castle. It is loud enough to wake sleeping people, distinctive enough that everyone knows immediately what it means: danger, emergency, threat. Thomas has never had to use it in an actual emergency. He has tested it during drills probably 1,000 times over 7 years, but never for real. He prays to Saint Christopher, patron saint of travellers and protector of those in danger, every single night that he never will, because using the rattle means something has gone so catastrophically wrong that he can't handle it alone. It means the castle is under attack, or there is a fire spreading, or someone is dying, or the dead are walking. Yes, medieval people genuinely believed the dead could rise at night. This wasn't considered superstition, it was considered documented fact. Third, there is a small pewter flask containing blessed water from St. Winifred's well in North Wales. This isn't drinking water. Thomas has a separate leather water skin for that. According to medieval belief systems, meticulously documented by historian Dr. Ronald Finucane in his book, Miracles and Pilgrims, this blessed water serves a very different purpose. If Thomas encounters something in the darkness that he cannot explain, something that makes his blood run cold, something that doesn't respond to his challenges in a normal human way, he is supposed to sprinkle this water while reciting the Paternoster. the Lord's Prayer in Latin. Now, you might think this is pure superstition, and from a modern scientific standpoint you'd be right. But here is what is fascinating. Whether or not the blessed water has any supernatural power doesn't actually matter. What matters is that it gives Thomas the psychological strength to continue moving forward when every instinct in his body is screaming at him to run. It is a coping mechanism, a tool for managing fear, and in a job where you face genuine terrors every night, where you walk alone through darkness that could hide anything, having a tool for managing fear is absolutely essential. Medieval people understood practical psychology, even if they didn't call it that. Fourth, there is a dagger. It is not particularly long, maybe 8 inches of blade from hilt to tip, but it is kept sharp enough to shave with. Thomas personally sharpens it every 3 days using a whetstone and careful, practiced strokes. He has never drawn this dagger against another human being in anger or defense, but he has killed 3 dogs over the years. Dogs that had gone feral or mad and gotten into the castle somehow. He has killed 2 wildcats, vicious creatures with razor claws that can tear flesh to the bone. And once, memorably, he killed a wild boar that somehow got into the lower courtyard. That boar story is legendary among the castle garrison, told and retold with growing embellishment, but the core facts are documented in castle records. A boar, probably driven down from the mountains by hunger or wolves, somehow got through the outer defences and into the courtyard. It was Thomas, on his night rounds, who encountered it. A wild boar can weigh 400 pounds and has tusks that can disembowel a horse. In the darkness, armed only with his dagger and lantern, Thomas somehow managed to kill it. The exact details have been lost to time and storytelling, but the fact remains, he survived an encounter that should have killed him. Fifth, and finally, there is a small leather-bound book. Most night watchmen can't read. Literacy in medieval Europe was maybe 10% for men, much lower for women. But Thomas can read, taught by a Benedictine monk when he was young. His father had aspirations for him, dreams that he might enter religious life, become a clerk or scribe. Those dreams didn't work out, but the literacy remained. This book contains the patrol schedule in Thomas's own careful handwriting, the locations of every key checkpoint he must visit throughout the night, and most importantly, the list of passwords that change every 3 days. These passwords are how Thomas knows that the person approaching him in the darkness is authorized to be moving around at night. They're chosen very carefully, following rules that have been developed over centuries of night watch experience. Always 2-syllable words that can't be easily confused when whispered. Never words that sound like other common words. Never words in Latin, because some people might not know Latin well enough to pronounce them correctly under stress. Tonight's password is shepherd. Yesterday it was harvest. Tomorrow it will be candles. Simple words, but words that someone who isn't supposed to be there wouldn't know. As the sun touches the western mountains, staining them red and gold and purple, Thomas stands in the castle's outer ward and watches the transformation begin. This is my favourite part of medieval castle life, and I think you'll understand why. In our modern world, nighttime is really just daytime, with less light. We move through it without fundamentally changing how we live. We drive at night, we work at night, we shop at night. 24-hour stores, 24-hour news, 24-hour news, 24-hour entertainment. Night is just another time slot in our continuous modern existence. But in Thomas's world, night isn't just darker day. It is a different reality entirely. It is a different set of rules, different behaviours, different fears. It is almost like stepping into another world, and you can see that transformation happening as the sun sets. The first thing that happens is what the castle documents call the gathering. This is a formal procedure, documented in castle regulations and enforced with genuine consequences for violations. According to Dr. Roberta Gilchrist's extensive research on medieval daily life, published in her book Medieval Life, Archaeology and the Life Course, every single person in the castle who isn't part of the night staff must be accounted for before sunset. Not suggested, not recommended, required. This isn't optional. Merchants who came during the day to trade their goods must either leave immediately or find official lodging in the town below the castle walls. Craftsmen who are working in the castle workshops, maybe shoeing horses or repairing weapons or fixing damaged stonework, must pack up their tools and depart. Messengers who arrived with news or letters must either gain explicit permission from the constable to stay overnight, or they must ride out before the gates close, even if they're exhausted, even if their horses are tired. This isn't cruelty. This is survival. The castle needs to know exactly, precisely, without any doubt who is inside when darkness falls. Because in the night, strangers aren't just suspicious, they're potentially deadly. Thomas watches as the last merchant of the day, a spice trader from Bristol, hurries toward the main gate. The man is practically running, his mule loaded with unsold goods, bags of saffron and cinnamon and pepper, luxuries that cost more per ounce than silver. He is running because he knows exactly what is coming. The gate will close at the moment of sunset, and once it closes, it doesn't open again until dawn. Not for emergency, not for money, no matter how much you offer, not for any reason short of the king himself demanding entry. And even then, even if King Edward himself arrived at the gate at midnight, protocol would require extensive verification through the locked gate passwords and counter-passwords before anyone would even consider opening it. The spice merchant makes it through with maybe 10 minutes to spare. Thomas sees the relief on the man's face, sees him pause just outside the gate to catch his breath and calm his panicked mule. Last month, a cloth merchant from Lincoln misjudged the time, got caught up in a negotiation that went longer than expected, and found himself locked out when the gates closed. He had to spend the night in the town below, and according to castle records, he filed a formal complaint about the excessive and unreasonable strictness of the watch. The constable's response, preserved in the archives and still readable today, is worth quoting exactly. Better one merchant inconvenienced for one night than one throat cut in the darkness. The watch stands. That is the medieval mindset in a single sentence. Night safety trumps all other concerns, all of them, even commerce, even convenience, even courtesy. Now the gate crew begins their work, and this is where you really see the paranoia, the meticulous attention to security that defined medieval castle life. There are 4 men on the gate crew this evening, 2 guards to operate the windlass that controls the massive iron portcullis, and 2 more to swing the huge oak doors closed. These doors are incredible pieces of medieval engineering, marvels of carpentry and metalwork. Each door is 8 inches thick, constructed from oak trees that were over 200 years old when they were felled for this purpose. Old oak, fully seasoned, is nearly as hard as iron and far more resistant to fire. The doors are bound with iron straps, each strap forged by the castle blacksmith over multiple days of heating and hammering and shaping. Each strap weighs over 30 pounds. The doors hang on hinges that are themselves works of art, massive iron loops that required 3 months of labour to create, each one strong enough to support thousands of pounds of weight. When these doors swing shut, the boom echoes across the entire castle, a sound that everyone recognises, a sound that marks the transition from day to night. But here is what really fascinates me, and this is where we see the medieval obsession with night security at its most intense, most paranoid, most ingenious. These doors don't just close and lock with a simple bolt. According to detailed architectural analysis by Dr. John Goodall, published in the journal Castle Studies, medieval castle gates employed what he calls progressive security, or layered defence. It is security through redundancy, multiple systems that all have to be defeated before the gate can be opened. First, the doors swing shut with that echoing boom. Then, 3 iron bars are dropped into place across the inside of the doors. Each bar weighs over 100 pounds, solid iron as thick as a man's wrist. These bars slot into brackets, built into the stone walls on either side of the gate. Then, additional wooden beams are added, thick lengths of oak that add another layer of reinforcement. Then, and only then, are the locks engaged. Not one lock, not 2, 7 separate locks, each completely independent of the others, each with a different key, each key held by a different officer. Why 7 locks? Think about the logic here. It is brilliant and paranoid in equal measure. 7 locks means no single person can open the gate. It requires a consensus, a gathering of multiple officers, a collective decision. This system, which historians call distributed authority, meant that betrayal became almost impossible. Even if an enemy managed to infiltrate the castle and convince one officer to help them, bribe him or blackmail him or threaten his family, that traitor would still need to corrupt 6 other officers. The odds of successfully corrupting 7 different people without being discovered were vanishingly small. This system acknowledges a fundamental truth about security. The weakest link in any defense is usually human loyalty. You can build walls 100 feet high, but if someone inside opens the gate, those walls mean nothing. So medieval castle designers created systems where no single person could betray the castle. It is sophisticated security design, and we still use variations of it today in nuclear launch codes and bank vaults and other high security situations. Thomas watches this ritual every single night, has watched it for 7 years, and every single night it gives him the same cold feeling in his stomach. Because once those gates close, once those bars drop, once those locks click shut, once the keys are returned to their separate locations, there is no way out. If something goes catastrophically wrong tonight, if fire breaks out in the wooden buildings inside the stone shell, if plague strikes and people start dying, if someone has a medical crisis that requires a physician from outside, there is no calling for outside help. The castle is sealed. Everyone inside is trapped together until dawn. The castle has become, in essence, a ship at sea. Whatever happens in the night, they face it together, for better or worse. The sun is almost gone now, just a sliver of red above the mountains, like the world is bleeding light. Thomas takes a deep breath, feels the cold air fill his lungs, and begins his rounds. He starts with what is called the inspection, a systematic check of the entire castle that takes about 2 hours to complete thoroughly. He'll walk every corridor, check every door, look into every chamber where people aren't sleeping. This isn't paranoia or busy work. According to castle account books analysed by Dr. Oliver Creighton in his comprehensive study, Castles and Landscapes, castle constables had specific, well-documented fears about what could go wrong at night. Fire was the primary terror, the nightmare that kept constables awake during the day. One candle left burning unattended, one ember from a hearth rolling onto a wooden floor, one oil lamp knocked over by a careless servant or a restless dog. Any of these could start a fire that would kill everyone in the castle. It is that simple and that terrifying. Stone doesn't burn, but everything inside the stone shell does. Wooden floors, wooden furniture, wooden roof beams, straw for bedding, wool for clothing, stored grain, dried meat. Everything that made the castle livable was also fuel for fire. So Thomas checks every fireplace, every candle, every oil lamp. Anything that produces flame must be either extinguished completely or secured behind stone, watched by someone designated to stay awake. There are no exceptions to this rule. Even the nobility, even visiting lords, even theoretically the king himself would be subject to fire safety protocols, because fire doesn't care about rank or title. It kills indiscriminately. Let me introduce you to someone Thomas encounters on this first inspection round, because I want you to understand that this isn't just a story about Thomas. It is a story about Thomas. It is a story about an entire community of people living through the medieval night. Her name is Margaret, and she is 28 years old. Though she looks older, worn down by years of hard labour, she is the castle's head laundress, supervising a staff of 6 women who wash, dry, and mend the linens for everyone in the castle. It is back-breaking work that starts before dawn and continues until the light fails. Margaret's hands are permanently red and cracked from the lye soap they use. harsh stuff made from wood ash and animal fat that cleans effectively but destroys skin. Her back aches constantly from bending over washing tubs. She has a persistent cough from breathing in damp air and soap fumes for hours every day. By modern standards, her working conditions would be considered inhumane. But by medieval standards, she is actually fortunate. She has a skilled trade. She earns regular wages. She has a certain amount of status and authority. Many women had it much worse. When Thomas enters the laundry, located in a ground floor room near the well for easy water access, he can still feel residual warmth from the day's fires. The massive copper tubs used for boiling linens are empty now, the fires beneath them carefully extinguished and checked multiple times. Margaret is doing one final inspection of the drying racks, making absolutely certain no smouldering cloth remains. Damp cloth near a heat source can smoulder for hours before bursting into flame. It is a known danger, documented in multiple castle fires throughout England. She turns when she hears Thomas's footsteps, recognizes him even in the dim light of his lantern, and even in that dimness Thomas can see she has been crying. Her eyes are red and swollen. Her face has tear tracks. "Checked everything twice, Master Thomas," Margaret says, her voice steady despite the obvious emotional distress. "All fires dead and cold. All candles out, all oil lamps emptied and stored." Thomas nods. He has known Margaret for 5 years, known her since she was promoted to head laundress. He knows her children, 2 daughters still living and 2 sons buried in the small cemetery behind the castle chapel. He knows her husband works as a stone mason in the town below, skilled labour that pays reasonably well, and he knows that 2 days ago her youngest child, a boy of 4 named William, fell sick with what the castle physician called the wasting fever. In our modern world, with our modern medical knowledge, we'd identify this as scarlet fever, a bacterial infection that is easily treated with antibiotics. A few days of medication and William would be fine. But in Margaret's world, there are no antibiotics. There is prayer. There is herbal remedies that might help or might do nothing. There is the physician's limited knowledge, based on ancient texts and personal experience. And there is the awful waiting to see if the child's body is strong enough to fight off the infection alone. "How is young William?" Thomas asks, though he is not entirely sure he wants to know the answer. In medieval times, asking about a sick child was asking whether they'd survived another day. Margaret's face crumples for just a moment before she masters herself, forces her features back into composure. "The fever broke an hour ago, just before sunset," the physician says. "He says William might live." Her voice cracks on that word. Might. Think about that for a second. Really think about it. In our world, when a child gets sick with a fever, we're worried and anxious, but we generally assume they'll recover. Modern medicine has given us that luxury, that expectation of survival. But in Margaret's world, when a child gets sick, you don't assume recovery. You start preparing for death. You start thinking about which dress or tunic to bury them in. You start considering which prayers to have said for their soul. You think about how you'll tell the older children that their sibling is gone. And if the child does survive, if the fever breaks and they start to recover, it is not just a relief. It is not just good news. It is a miracle. It is a gift you never expected to receive. It is your child being returned from the very edge of death. Thomas reaches out and squeezes Margaret's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that crosses the social boundaries between them. "Then we'll pray he continues to improve. God is merciful, Margaret." "God is merciful," Margaret repeats, but there is doubt in her voice. Doubt born from burying 2 children already. When you've stood beside small graves, when you felt dirt falling on tiny coffins, the concept of divine mercy becomes complicated. You still believe because what else can you do? But belief becomes darker, more questioning, shadowed by grief. This small interaction, by the way, isn't something I invented to make the story more emotional. Medieval castle records are filled with these human moments. The account books don't just track money spent on supplies and wages paid to workers. They track people's lives. Births get recorded because infants might need baptism. Deaths get recorded because funeral expenses must be paid. Illnesses get recorded because sick workers might need their duties temporarily reassigned. According to Dr. Barbara Hannawalt's extensive research on medieval family life, castle communities were intensely interconnected in ways modern people struggle to understand. Everyone knew everyone else's business. Privacy, as we understand it, simply didn't exist. When Margaret's child got sick, everyone in the castle knew within hours. They knew because isolation was impossible in such close quarters, but they also knew because survival required community. If Margaret couldn't work because she was caring for her dying son, other women would take over her duties without being asked. And when their children got sick, when their tragedy struck, Margaret would return the favour. This mutual dependence created bonds of loyalty and affection that we've largely lost in our modern world of privacy and independence. Thomas continues his inspection. The great hall is empty now, eerily so after the noise and chaos of the evening meal just 2 hours ago. The long wooden tables where 200 people ate dinner are bare except for a few crumbs that will be swept up in the morning. The hall smells of smoke from the central hearth, roasted meat from the evening's meal, and unwashed humanity. Medieval castles, it must be said honestly, smelled pretty intense. Without running water, without modern sanitation, without daily bathing, with hundreds of people and dozens of animals living in close quarters, the smell was what historian Dr. Ruth Mazzo-Carras describes as overwhelming by modern standards. But Thomas doesn't notice it. You can't smell your own environment. This is just what life smells like to him. He checks the high windows that pierce the thick stone walls. These windows are small, barely 2 feet across at their widest point, covered with wooden shutters that are now firmly closed and barred from the inside. During the day, these shutters stay open to let in precious light and fresh air. At night, they're sealed tight. Why? The answer reveals a fascinating aspect of medieval medical belief. According to medieval understanding, documented in medical texts like the 13th century, De Proprietibus Rerum by Bartholomew the Englishman, night air was genuinely dangerous, not metaphorically dangerous, actually physically dangerous to human health. They believed that harmful vapours, what they called bad air or miasma, rose from the ground after sunset. These vapours were thought to cause disease, madness, even death. This theory was completely wrong from a scientific standpoint. There are no disease-causing vapours that only rise at night. But here is what is fascinating. This wrong theory led to practices that actually did improve health. Shutting windows kept out mosquitoes that carried malaria, kept out cold night air that weakened immune systems, kept out actual intruders who might climb through open windows. Wrong theory. Right practice. Medieval people stumbled into effective disease prevention while believing things that weren't true. It is a reminder that you can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. The kitchen is Thomas's next stop, and this is where castle fire safety becomes deadly serious. The castle kitchen is located in a separate building, connected to the main hall by a covered walkway. Why separate? Because kitchen fires were terrifyingly common. Cooking with open flames, often cooking fatty meats that drip grease onto hot coals, handling hot oil, storing flour dust that can explode, keeping fires burning continuously from dawn to dusk. Kitchens were essentially fire hazards by design. So castle architects, learning from centuries of catastrophic fires, deliberately isolated kitchens. If the kitchen burned, and sooner or later every kitchen would have at least one serious fire, it wouldn't take the entire castle with it. This is sophisticated fire safety design. We still use variations of this principle in modern building codes. Fire doors, fire breaks, compartmentalization. The idea that you can't prevent all fires, but you can prevent fires from spreading, is ancient wisdom. The head cook, a man named Robert, is still in the kitchen even though the cooking fires have been banked for the night. Robert is 52 years old. which by medieval standards makes him practically ancient. Most men don't live past 40. Robert has survived through a combination of luck, skill, and sheer stubborn refusal to die. He has been the castle cook for 18 years, appointed by the previous constable and kept on by Lord Richard. He rules his kitchen domain with absolute authority. Knights might command armies, but in the kitchen, Robert's word is law. No one questions him. No one countermands his orders. He has achieved a level of respect usually reserved for nobility, all through mastery of his craft. "Evening, Thomas," Robert says without looking up. He is counting tomorrow's rations, making careful notes on a wax tablet with the iron stylus. He needs to know exactly how much grain, how much meat, how much vegetables are prepared and ready. Everything's secure. Checked it myself 3 times, like always. Thomas knows Robert well enough to trust him implicitly, but he still walks the kitchen perimeter anyway, checking the 3 main hearths. Protocol exists for a reason. Each hearth has been carefully banked, the hot coals buried under a layer of ash, to preserve them for tomorrow's fires. Starting a fire from scratch in medieval times was genuinely difficult, requiring either flint and steel, which is harder than movies make it look, or borrowing fire from a neighbour, so fires were kept alive whenever possible, carefully maintained, passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. According to research by Dr. Mary Wiesner Hanks, some medieval households had fires that had been burning continuously for over 100 years. Imagine that. Great-grandmothers lit a fire, and great-granddaughters were still feeding that same fire, maintaining an unbroken chain of warmth and light across generations. It is beautiful in a way, this continuity, but these sleeping fires were also dangerous. One gust of wind finding its way down a chimney, one spark reaching a wooden beam, one small mistake, and everyone dies. Thomas has seen it happen, not here at Casernaphon, where fire safety protocols are strictly enforced, but years ago at another castle where he served as a junior guard. He watched that castle burn. He heard the screams of people trapped inside, beating against doors that had warped shut from heat. He smelled burning flesh, a smell you never forget. He knows that the line between controlled fire and lethal chaos is thinner than most people want to believe. "Robert," Thomas says quietly, "you should go get some sleep. Long day tomorrow with Lord Edward's retinue arriving." Robert grunts acknowledgement. Sleep, right. As if anyone sleeps properly in this damn cold stone tomb. But he is already putting away his wax tablet, already heading toward the door that leads to his small private chamber off the kitchen, one of the perks of his senior position. Thomas watches him go and feels a sudden, unexpected wave of loneliness. It is just past 8 o'clock in the evening. Thomas has been on duty for about 2 hours. He has 12 more hours ahead of him. 12 hours of walking stone corridors, 12 hours of checking doors and windows, 12 hours of listening to the darkness. This is the part they don't tell you about night watch duty. It is not the danger that breaks you, though the danger is real. It is not even the exhaustion, though by dawn you are stumbling with fatigue. It is the isolation. It is the knowledge that everyone else is sleeping, dreaming, wrapped in warmth and family and the comfort of shared darkness, while you walk alone through cold corridors, alert for threats that might never come, but might come. That is the thing that keeps Thomas walking, that keeps him alert even when his mind starts to wander. The threats might come. They probably won't, but they might. And if they do, he needs to be ready. He needs to be sharp. He needs to be the barrier between safety and catastrophe. The castle is settling now into its night configuration, and Thomas can hear it happening. It is a symphony of small sounds, doors closing softly as families bed down for the night, final conversations ending, voices dropping to whispers and then to silence, children being hushed by exhausted parents, the sounds of day giving way to the sounds of night. And what does night sound like in a medieval castle? It sounds, surprisingly, like a lot of small noises. Stone cooling after a day of autumn sun makes tiny crackling sounds, little pops and creaks as the rock contracts. Wind finding gaps in shutters and around door frames creates low moans, almost like voices. Animals in the stables shift and shuffle, horses dreaming whatever horses dream. The castle is never actually silent. It is just that all the human sounds stop, and suddenly you can hear everything else. Thomas begins what he privately calls the Tower Round. Caernarfon Castle has 9 major towers, each one named and distinct, each serving multiple purposes. These towers are defensive positions, certainly, but they're also living quarters for important people, storage areas for valuable goods, workshops for specialized crafts, and in some unfortunate cases, prisons. Thomas needs to check them all, every night, multiple times throughout his shift. He starts with the Eagle Tower, the castle's most impressive and imposing structure. This tower is 124 feet tall, which in medieval terms is almost incomprehensibly huge, with walls 18 feet thick at the base, tapering to still massive 10 feet at the top. It takes Thomas 5 full minutes of steady climbing just to reach the top observation platform, and he is in good shape from years of this work. His legs burn, his lungs work hard. By the time he reaches the observation platform, he is breathing heavily. The staircase, by the way, spirals clockwise as you ascend. This isn't random architectural choice. This is deliberate military design. According to extensive research by military historian Dr. Kelly DeVries, medieval castle stairs were almost universally built to spiral clockwise. Why? Because most people are right-handed. If an attacker is climbing the stairs, fighting his way up, his sword arm is against the central stone pillar, making it hard to swing effectively. But a defender coming down the stairs has his sword arm free, facing outward with maximum room to swing. It is a small detail, but in the chaos of close quarters combat, small details like this could mean the difference between life and death. Hundreds of attackers died on spiral staircases, unable to effectively use their weapons, cut down by defenders who had architectural advantage. At the top of the Eagle Tower, Thomas emerges onto the observation platform, and the wind immediately hits him like a physical force. It is much stronger up here, cold with the promise of winter, carrying the smell of the sea that is miles away, but still present in the air. From this height, Thomas can see the entire castle spread below him like an elaborate model. And beyond the castle walls, he can see the town settling into night. A few lights still flickering, candles in windows, torches at street corners. But even as he watches, those lights are winking out one by one, as if the darkness is consuming them, swallowing them into itself. Thomas pulls his thick woolen cloak tighter around himself and walks the perimeter of the observation platform. The platform is ringed with crenellations, the alternating high and low sections of wall that everyone recognizes from pictures of castles. Those gaps, the low sections called crenels, are wide enough for an archer to shoot through, but also wide enough for a man to fall through if he is not careful. Thomas has developed an automatic caution about this after 7 years. He stays back from the edge, always keeps one hand on the wall. He is looking for anything unusual, movement on the roads leading to the castle, lights where lights shouldn't be, smoke that might indicate fire, signs of military activity in the surrounding countryside. But tonight everything is quiet and still. The roads are empty and dark. The forest beyond the town is a black mass, darker than the sky. It looks peaceful up here, beautiful even in a stark and lonely way, but Thomas knows better than to trust appearances. Beauty can hide danger. Let me tell you about something that happened on this very tower, 3 years before Thomas became chief watchman, because this story explains why Thomas takes his job so seriously. There was a watchman named Hugh, a good man by all accounts, experienced and careful. One night in November, Hugh was doing his regular tower round when he saw lights moving in the forest. Multiple lights, maybe a dozen, moving in formation like a military patrol. Hugh watched them for several minutes, trying to decide if they represented a genuine threat. They were moving slowly, methodically, like scouts, checking the castle defences. Hugh faced a dilemma that every watchman dreads. His training told him to raise the alarm immediately. Strange lights at night deserve investigation, but his experience told him to wait, to gather more information, because false alarms were punished severely. Wake up the entire garrison, ruin everyone's sleep, cause panic and chaos, and if it turns out to be nothing, you face demotion or dismissal. So Hugh waited, watching those lights, trying to decide. While Hugh was deciding, the lights reached the edge of the forest and stopped. They stayed there, not advancing toward the castle, not retreating, just waiting, as if they knew someone was watching, as if they were testing the castle's alertness. Hugh watched them for perhaps 15 minutes total, and finally he decided the threat was real enough to warrant alarm. He used his rattle, that harsh chattering sound, cutting through the night. The alarm woke the entire castle. Knights grabbed weapons, pulling on armor in darkness. Archers ran to the walls, notching arrows with practiced speed. The constable himself came out, half-dressed, but fully angry at being woken from deep sleep. They all looked at the lights in the forest, probably 200 people staring into the darkness, and while they watched, the lights began to move again, but not toward the castle, away from it, back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness, like they'd never been there. The constable demanded an explanation. Hugh didn't have one. The next morning they sent armed men into the forest to investigate 20 soldiers in full armor ready for combat. They found tracks, lots of them, boot prints from at least 20 different men, maybe more. They found the remains of torches deliberately extinguished and buried. They found evidence of a camp hastily abandoned, including food scraps and horse droppings. Someone had been out there, someone had been watching the castle, and when they realised they'd been spotted, they retreated. The constable praised Hugh for his alertness, but Hugh was demoted anyway, stripped of his senior position and reassigned to basic day guard duty, a humiliating demotion that everyone in the garrison knew about. Why? Because he'd hesitated. Because he'd delayed raising the alarm while he tried to confirm the threat. Better a dozen false alarms, the constable said in his official statement, than one real danger missed. The watchman must act on suspicion, not wait for certainty. By the time you are certain, it is too late. Hugh spent the rest of his life, another 15 years, as a basic guard. He never got his senior position back. The message was clear and brutal. On night watch, caution is not a virtue. Hypervigilance is the only acceptable state. You raise the alarm if you see something wrong, and you deal with the consequences of being wrong. Because being right once, catching one real threat, is worth being wrong 100 times. Thomas thinks about Hugh's story every single time he does the tower round. He has promised himself that he'll never hesitate. The moment he sees something that troubles him, he'll sound the alarm and face whatever consequences come. His reputation, his pride, even his job matter less than the safety of the 300 people sleeping in the castle below. But tonight, thank God, there are no mysterious lights, no movements in the forest, just darkness, wind, and the distant hoot of an owl. Thomas completes his inspection of the tower, takes one final look at the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, and begins the long descent. The descent is actually more dangerous than the climb, which might surprise you. The stairs are worn smooth by literally centuries of feet, countless soldiers and servants climbing and descending, their footsteps gradually wearing away the surface of the stone. In the weak light of Thomas's lantern, it is easy to misstep, easy to catch your toe on an uneven step, easy to stumble. Thomas has trained himself to count the steps, 147 steps from the observation platform to ground level. He counts them silently as he descends, using the count to stay focused, to keep his mind from wandering into dangerous territory. When your mind wanders on narrow stairs in dim light, accidents happen, and accidents at night can be fatal because help is slow to arrive. At the bottom of the Eagle Tower, Thomas encounters his first fellow watchman of the evening. This is John, one of the 4 assistant watchmen who work under Thomas's supervision. John is 19 years old, which makes him very young for this job, but he has proven himself capable during his 6 months of service. He is stationed at the intersection of 2 main corridors, and his job is simple in concept, but demanding in practice. Stand here, stay awake and alert, challenge anyone who approaches, and use his whistle to signal Thomas if anything goes wrong. Report, Thomas says, keeping his voice low. Sound travels strangely at night in stone corridors, amplified and distorted, and there is no reason to wake people unnecessarily. All quiet, sir, John whispers back. Did my 9 o'clock round like you taught me. Checked every door in the south corridor, all secure. Nobody moving who shouldn't be. Thomas nods approval. John is learning well, developing good instincts, but Thomas can also see that John is scared, though the young man tries to hide it. There is tension in his shoulders. His hand keeps drifting to the whistle around his neck, touching it for reassurance like a talisman. Thomas remembers being that scared during his own first year on night watch. Remembers thinking that every shadow hid enemies, that every sound was the beginning of attack. You are doing well, John, Thomas says, and means it. Remember what I told you during training. Trust your ears more than your eyes. In the dark, you'll hear problems before you see them. Yes, sir, John says. Then, after a pause, sir, is it true what they say about the sounds in the Queen's Tower? Ah, here we go. Every castle has its ghost stories, its unexplained phenomena. It's things that happen in the night that no one can rationally explain. The Queen's Tower sounds are one of Caernarfon's most persistent mysteries, discussed in whispers, embellished with each retelling. People hear things in that tower, footsteps when no one is walking, voices when no one is speaking, crying that seems to come from inside the walls themselves, as if the stones themselves are weeping. Thomas chooses his words carefully. He could dismiss this as superstition, but that would be dishonest. He has heard things in the Queen's Tower, things he cannot explain. I've heard sounds in the Queen's Tower that I couldn't identify or explain, Thomas says honestly, but I've never encountered anything that threatened me or anyone else. The castle is old. John's stone settles and makes noises. Wind plays tricks, creating sounds that seem like voices. Rats in the walls can sound remarkably like footsteps. Our minds, especially at night when we're tired and alone, tend to fill in darkness with our fears. But you've heard things, John persists, needing to know. I've heard things, Thomas admits. Everyone who has worked night watch here has heard things that made their skin crawl. But we're not here to explain mysteries. We're here to keep people safe from real physical dangers. Focus on that. Focus on what you can control and what actually matters. It is good, practical advice, and Thomas believes it, mostly. But there is a part of him, a part he doesn't share with John, that wonders about the things he has heard. The time he distinctly heard a woman singing in the Queen's Tower, a sad melody in a language he didn't recognize, with words that sounded like Welsh but older somehow, stranger. He investigated immediately, walking quickly to the tower with his heart pounding. The tower was completely empty. No woman. No source for the singing. Nothing. The time he heard what sounded like a child laughing in the courtyard at 2 a.m, not crying, which would make sense because children sometimes wake at night, laughing. A bright, joyful, innocent sound that stopped abruptly, cut off mid-laugh when he called out, "Who is there?" He searched the courtyard thoroughly. No child, no explanation. The time he heard footsteps following him through the east corridor. Heavy footsteps, boots on stone, matching his pace exactly, staying maybe 10 feet behind him. He stopped. The footsteps stopped. He walked faster. The footsteps walked faster. He spun around with his lantern raised. Nothing but empty corridor and darkness. Thomas doesn't believe in ghosts. Or rather, he tells himself he doesn't believe in ghosts because believing in ghosts would make his job impossible. How can you patrol effectively if you think the dead are walking the same corridors? But he also knows that the line between the living and the dead feels very thin at 3 in the morning when you are alone in a dark corridor, and you hear something you absolutely cannot explain. Medieval Christianity, it is worth noting, had a much more fluid understanding of the boundary between life and death than we do today. According to extensive research by religious historian Dr. Nancy Cassiola in her book, Discerning Spirits, medieval people believed that the dead were never truly gone. They lingered, especially if they died violently or if they had unfinished business. The dead could communicate with the living through dreams and visions. Under certain conditions, they could even appear physically. This wasn't considered weird or supernatural in the way we might think. It was just how things were. The afterlife and earthly life overlapped, intermingled, existed side by side. So when Thomas hears unexplainable sounds when John asks about ghost stories, they're engaging with genuine medieval beliefs. These aren't fairy tales. These are real fears and real interpretations of real experiences. Thomas leaves John at his post and continues his rounds, working his way methodically through the castle's 3 main levels. The lower level houses the servants and basic craftsmen, people sleeping in communal chambers on straw mattresses laid directly on stone floors. Privacy is impossible at this level. Families sleep separated from other families only by thin curtains, or sometimes not even that. The air in these chambers is thick with body heat and breath, making them slightly warmer than the cold corridors, but also suffocating in a way. The middle-level houses knights, men at arms, and more skilled workers like the blacksmith, the carpenter, the master mason. They have slightly better accommodations, smaller rooms, actual beds with wooden frames, a bit more privacy. These are men with status and skill, men who command respect and earn decent wages. They sleep better than the lower levels, but they're still a long way from comfortable by modern standards. The upper level is for nobility and wealthy visitors, the constable's quarters, rooms for visiting lords, luxurious chambers for merchants, rich enough to pay premium prices. These rooms have fireplaces for heat, glazed windows that let in light while keeping out wind, tapestries on the walls for insulation and decoration. This is the closest medieval people got to luxury, and by modern standards it is still pretty rough. Thomas doesn't usually enter sleeping chambers unless he has specific reason to. Privacy is precious in castle life, one of the few things people can claim as their own, and he respects that. But he walks past each door listening carefully. He is listening for sounds of distress, for arguments that might turn violent, for the crackling of fire, and he is mentally maintaining a constant count of how many people should be in each area. If someone is missing, if someone is somewhere they shouldn't be, Thomas needs to know immediately. As he passes the chamber where Margaret the laundress sleeps with her 3 surviving children, Thomas hears soft crying. It is young William, the 4-year-old, who nearly died 2 days ago, probably still feverish and uncomfortable, even though the worst has passed. Thomas can hear Margaret's voice, gentle and exhausted, singing a lullaby. The words are in Welsh, which Thomas doesn't speak fluently, but the melody is one he knows. His own mother sang it to him 30 years ago when he was small. Some things transcend language and time. A mother comforting a sick child. The same now as it was 1,000 years ago. The same as it will be 1,000 years from now. Thomas keeps walking. The middle level is quieter. Knights and men at arms are experienced sleepers, men who've campaigned in the field and learn to drop into unconsciousness quickly and wake instantly if needed. There is a military efficiency to how they rest. Thomas admires this, even though he could never do it himself. His mind doesn't turn off that easily, even during the day when he is supposed to be sleeping, catching the rest his body desperately needs. His sleep is light and broken and filled with echoes of night sounds. At the end of the middle corridor, Thomas encounters Peter, another assistant watchman. Peter is in his 40s, a veteran who has been doing night watch almost as long as Thomas. Peter has a fascinating story. He is completely deaf in his right ear from a battle injury 10 years ago. A Welsh spear point grazed the side of his head. Should have killed him, but somehow only destroyed his hearing on one side. By all logic, this injury should disqualify Peter from night watch. Hearing is critical, but Thomas has learned something remarkable. Peter's remaining ear, his left ear, is somehow more acute than most people's two ears combined. Peter has saved them from disaster at least twice, by hearing sounds no one else detected, including Thomas with his perfectly functional hearing. Doctors today might explain this as compensation, the brain rewiring itself to process sound more effectively through the remaining functional ear. Medieval people just called it God's mercy, divine compensation for suffering. Either way, Peter can hear things others miss, and that makes him invaluable. Evening, Peter. Anything to report? Quiet so far, Peter says. Checked the armory at 9 like scheduled. Everything's secure. No signs of tampering. The armory, right. Thomas needs to do his own independent check of that critical space. The armory is one of the most sensitive areas in the entire castle. A ground floor room locked with 3 separate keys held by 3 separate officers. During the day it is guarded. At night it is locked tight. Why such paranoia? Because the armory contains the castle's military power, swords, spears, crossbows, thousands of arrows, armor, shields, everything needed to fight. If an enemy, or worse, a traitor, gained access to the armory, they could arm themselves and anyone they wanted to arm. The castle would be vulnerable from within. Thomas uses 2 of his keys to open the armory's 3 locks. The 3rd key is held by the constable personally, and is only used if they actually need to distribute weapons for defense. The heavy wooden door swings open with a loud creak that makes Thomas wince. He has asked the blacksmith to oil these hinges at least a dozen times over the years, but the creak never goes away. Maybe oil doesn't help. Maybe the sound is intentional, a design feature rather than a flaw. Hard to steal weapons when the door announces your presence to everyone within earshot. Inside, the armory smells strongly of metal and oil. Weapons are stored carefully, swords hanging on wall racks, spears standing in corners like an iron forest. There are crossbows, carefully unstrung to preserve the tension in their limbs, stored flat on wooden shelves. There are bundles of arrows, each one marked with the castle's symbol to prevent theft. There are pieces of armor, helmets, chainmail shirts that weigh 40 pounds, leather jerkins reinforced with metal plates. It is an impressive collection worth a fortune by medieval standards. But more importantly, it is a measure of the castle's ability to defend itself. An enemy who captured this room would effectively control the castle's military capability. Thomas does a careful count, checking inventory against the mental list he has memorized over years. He knows exactly how many of each weapon should be here, down to the individual arrow. It is tedious work counting in dim lantern light, but it is necessary. Everything matches the inventory. No weapons missing, no signs of tampering with locks or windows. The room is secure. Thomas exits, locks the 3 locks carefully, checking each one twice to ensure it is properly engaged. It is approaching 10 o'clock now, which Thomas estimates by instinct more than measurement. There are no clocks in the castle, no way to measure time precisely. The castle does have a bell in the chapel tower that rings at specific times for religious services, but between those bells, time is more of an approximation. Thomas has been on duty for about 4 hours, and he has already walked what he estimates is about 3 miles of corridors and staircases, all of it inside this stone maze. By the end of his 14-hour shift, he'll have walked closer to 10 miles, maybe more. His feet hurt already. His knees ache. The cold is seeping into his bones despite his thick cloak. This is normal. Every night is like this. The discomfort is just part of the job, accepted and endured. But here is what is interesting about Thomas's experience of time, and this applies to all medieval people, not just night watchmen. According to extensive research by Dr. Roger Ekirk documented in his fascinating book At Day's Close, Night in Times Past, medieval people had a completely different relationship with nighttime hours than we do. They didn't divide the night into precise hours measured by clocks. Instead, they thought of it in terms of watches, each watch being roughly 3 hours, but actually flexible depending on the season and the specific night. Thomas is currently in what is called first watch, the period from sunset to about midnight, though midnight itself is hard to identify precisely. This is usually the quietest watch of the night because people are freshly asleep, tired from their day's labour. They sleep deeply during first watch, undisturbed by the aches and needs that will wake them later. Second watch, from midnight to about 3 in the morning, is what Thomas privately calls the danger zone. This is when most attacks happen historically, when most fires start, when most betrayals unfold. Why? Because this is when sleep is deepest for most people, when guards are most tired from being awake for hours, when the human body's natural alertness is at its lowest point. Medieval military strategists understood this. Castle defenders understood it, and attackers definitely understood it. If you are going to strike at a castle, if you are going to attempt infiltration, you do it during second watch. Third watch, from about 3 until dawn, is psychologically the hardest part of the night. By this point, Thomas will have been awake and walking for 8 or 9 hours straight. His body will be screaming for rest. His mind will be fuzzy with exhaustion. His lantern will be running low on candles. This is when mistakes happen, when guards fall asleep at their posts, despite their best intentions, when critical details get missed, because your brain simply can't process information effectively anymore. Thomas fights this predictable exhaustion with a strategy he learned from his mentor years ago. During third watch, he deliberately changes his patrol route. Instead of following his usual pattern, he forces himself to take different paths through the castle. This confuses his muscle memory, makes him pay attention to where he is going, instead of walking on autopilot. It is harder, mentally taxing, but it keeps him alert when his body wants nothing more than to shut down and sleep. But we're still in first watch, and Thomas has hours to go before those challenges right now. His main task is establishing the baseline for tonight. Every night is slightly different, affected by weather, temperature, wind direction, who is awake and who is asleep. Thomas needs to understand tonight's particular character, its normal sounds and rhythms, so he can detect when something changes. When something goes wrong, he climbs to the wall walk, the defensive pathway that runs along the top of the castle's curtain walls. This pathway is about 6 feet wide, protected on the outer side by the crenellated battlements and on the inner side by a waist-high wall to prevent people from accidentally falling into the courtyard 40 feet below. The wall walk is exposed to the elements, and up here the wind is fierce, strong enough to make Thomas's lantern flicker wildly despite its protective horn panels. Thomas sets his lantern down in a sheltered corner near a tower entrance, and then does something that might seem insane. He walks the wall walk in complete darkness, extinguishing his light deliberately. This seems dangerous, and it is. One misstep and he could fall to his death, but it is also necessary. Walking with a lit lantern makes you visible to anyone watching from outside the castle. Your light advertises your position, makes you a target. Walking in darkness makes you nearly invisible, a shadow moving among shadows. Thomas navigates by memory and touch, one hand trailing along the inner wall, his feet moving carefully, testing each step before committing his weight. His eyes slowly adjust to starlight, and shapes begin to emerge from the darkness. Not details, just vague forms. The bulk of towers, the line of battlements against the slightly lighter sky, it is enough to navigate by. From the wall walk, Thomas can see the landscape surrounding the castle. The moon hasn't risen yet, won't rise for another hour or two, so the darkness is profound. But his dark adapted eyes can make out shapes, the darker mass of the forest to the west, the slightly lighter area where the town lies with its handful of remaining lights, the ribbon of the river catching faint starlight. It is beautiful in a stark, cold way, beautiful and terrifying, because Thomas knows what is out there beyond these walls. Let me tell you about the world outside medieval castles at night, because understanding this context is crucial to understanding Thomas's vigilance. According to historian Dr. Barbara Hannawalt's extensive research on medieval crime, documented in her book Crime and Conflict in English Communities, the medieval night was genuinely dangerous in ways modern people living in developed countries can barely comprehend. Crime rates after dark were approximately 30 times higher than during the day. 30 times. Robbery, assault, rape, murder, assault. All of these occurred primarily at night. Why such a dramatic difference? Because the darkness provided perfect cover for criminals, and the complete lack of organized police forces meant that once the sun went down, you were largely on your own. There were no street lights, no patrols, no way to call for help that would actually bring help. If something bad happened to you at night, you either defended yourself or you died. It was that brutally simple. But it wasn't just human threats that made the medieval night dangerous. Animal attacks were a genuine concern. Wolves still roamed much of medieval Europe, and while they typically avoided humans, a hungry pack in winter was a serious danger. A single wolf wouldn't usually attack a healthy adult, but wolves hunt in packs, and a pack of wolves can bring down any prey. Wild boars, as Thomas knows personally from his famous encounter, were aggressive animals that could kill a person easily. Even domestic animals turned threatening at night. Dogs formed feral packs, cattle could panic and trample you in darkness, horses could kick without warning if startled, and then there were the travellers. This might surprise you, but some people did travel at night in medieval times, despite the enormous dangers. Messengers on urgent business, carrying news that couldn't wait. Criminals fleeing justice. Sometimes tragically ordinary people who'd miscalculated distances and found themselves caught between towns after sunset with nowhere safe to shelter. These desperate travellers would sometimes appear at castle gates late at night, begging for shelter, and Thomas has had to make terrible decisions about whether to let them in. Just last year, Thomas faced a decision that still haunts his dreams. A woman arrived at the gates around midnight, pounding on the massive doors and screaming for help. She was hysterical, barely coherent, claiming she was fleeing from bandits who'd attacked her and her merchant husband on the road. She said her husband was wounded and dying just half a mile away. She begged Thomas to send men out to help him, to save him before the bandits came back to finish the job. Thomas had to decide, and he had maybe 2 minutes to make this decision. Did he believe her story? Did he risk sending men out into the darkness, potentially walking into an ambush? This is a classic tactic for infiltrating fortified positions. Send a woman, injured or claiming injury, to a gate. Defenders, being human and having some compassion, open the gate to help. Armed men who've been hiding rush the opening. The castle is taken. Thomas knew this tactic. Every watchman knows it, so he made what he thought was the right decision. He told the woman she could shelter in the outer ward, the space between the outer and inner walls, but that no one would leave the castle until morning. No rescue party. No help for her supposedly wounded husband. She had to either accept shelter or leave. Those were the only options. The woman screamed at him, cursed him, called him a coward and a murderer. She pounded on the gate with her fists until her hands bled. She sobbed and begged and pleaded for hours. Thomas listened to all of this from the other side of the gate, listened and forced himself not to open it, not to help, because helping could mean everyone dying. Eventually, sometime around 3 a.m, the woman stopped screaming. Thomas heard footsteps walking away from the gate. He thought maybe she'd given up, decided to seek shelter in the town. At dawn, when the gates opened, they found her. She was about 100 yards from the castle, lying in the road. Her throat had been cut. She'd been robbed of everything, even her shoes. There was no wounded husband, probably never had been. She'd been alone, running from something or someone, and she'd been caught. Thomas had made the right decision from a security standpoint. Opening the gate at midnight for an unknown woman with an unverifiable story would have been insane, a violation of every security protocol. But he still thinks about her constantly. He still hears her screaming. He wonders if there was anything he could have done differently. Probably not, but that doesn't make it easier to live with. This is what I mean when I say that Thomas isn't just guarding against enemies. He is guarding against the entire concept of night, against all the dangers and terrors and moral complexities that darkness brings. It is a job that requires constant vigilance, yes, but also constant moral decision-making. Who do you trust? Who do you refuse? When do you break the rules to help someone? And when do you follow procedures no matter how cruel they seem? There are no good answers to these questions, just choices and consequences. Thomas finishes his circuit of the wall walk in darkness and retrieves his lantern. His first candle is burning low now, maybe 15 minutes of light left. He needs to get back inside before it dies completely, because changing candles in the dark, in the wind, on a narrow wall walk 40 feet above the courtyard is a recipe for disaster. He has seen it happen. A guard dropped his lantern while trying to change candles, and the whole thing tumbled into the courtyard below, breaking apart and leaving him in absolute darkness. The guard panicked, started moving too fast, missed his footing on the smooth stones and fell. He survived, but barely. 2 broken legs, a broken arm, 3 cracked ribs. He never walked normally again. His night watch career ended, all because he didn't manage his candle timing properly. Thomas makes it back inside with time to spare. He is in a small guard room now, a chamber barely 6 feet square built into the thickness of the castle walls. This room exists solely for the use of guards on watch, a place to briefly rest, to swap information with the next shift, to maintain equipment. There is a small wooden table with supplies, extra candles, lamp oil, flint and steel for emergencies. Thomas takes a fresh candle from the carefully organized supply and lights it from the dying flame of his current candle. The moment of transfer is critical. If the old candle dies before the new one catches, he is plunged into darkness, fumbling for flint and steel, wasting precious time. But Thomas's hands are steady, practiced, and the new candle blooms into light smoothly. The relief he feels is probably disproportionate to the actual accomplishment. But after 7 years of doing this successfully hundreds of times, he is still never complacent about it. With fresh light, Thomas continues to the upper levels where nobility sleeps. This is where protocol becomes really strict, where his behavior must be beyond reproach. You don't just walk past these chambers casually, you pause at each door. You listen carefully for any sound that might indicate distress or danger, and you are prepared to intervene if you hear anything concerning. But you absolutely do not disturb the occupants unless there is genuine emergency. Waking a nobleman unnecessarily can cost you your job. The castle constable, Lord Richard, sleeps behind a door reinforced with iron bands and multiple locks. Thomas can hear snoring from inside, a rhythmic rumbling that speaks of deep, untroubled sleep. Lord Richard is 56 years old, a veteran of multiple military campaigns in Wales and Scotland. He has the soldier's valuable gift of sleeping deeply whenever the opportunity arises, trusting his men to wake him if needed. Thomas admires this ability, even though he can't replicate it. His mind doesn't work that way. Next to Lord Richard's chamber is a smaller room currently occupied by a visiting merchant from Venice named Giovanni. He arrived 3 days ago with an entourage of 6 people, assistants, servants, and personal guards. Giovanni is here to negotiate wool prices with Welsh suppliers, and he is paying the castle handsomely for luxurious accommodations and protection during his stay. These Italian merchants are fascinating to Thomas. They dress differently, eat different foods, keep different hours, speak limited English. They've caused some disruption to castle routines, but the money they pay helps fund castle operations, so Lord Richard tolerates them. Thomas can hear voices from Giovanni's room, even though it is well past 10 at night. The merchant is apparently still awake, speaking rapidly in Italian to someone, probably one of his assistants. Thomas doesn't understand the words, but he recognizes the tone. Business negotiations, numbers being discussed, deals being calculated. Even at 10 o'clock at night, commerce continues for these merchants. They're a different breed, thinking about profit when everyone else is thinking about sleep. This actually raises an interesting point about medieval time use that historian Dr. Jacques Le Goff researched extensively. Medieval people didn't have our modern separation between work time and personal time. For many people, especially merchants and skilled craftsmen, work could happen whenever opportunity arose. If you had a chance to make a deal at 10 at night, you made it. If you could finish a task before dawn, you did it without complaining about the hour. The rigid 9-to-5 schedule, the idea that work happens during certain prescribed hours and life happens during others, is a modern invention created by industrial factories that needed standardized shifts. Medieval time was more fluid, more organic, shaped by opportunity and necessity, rather than by clocks. Thomas moves on. The next chamber houses a young knight named Sir Edmund, who arrived from London about a week ago. Edmund is 22 years old, the third son of a minor noble family, which means he has a title but no real wealth or prospects. He has been assigned to Caernarfon for garrison duty, which is basically a punishment posting, a way of exiling someone from court without officially exiling them. According to gossip that reached Thomas through castle servants, Edmund had an ill-advised affair with someone he absolutely shouldn't have, someone connected to a powerful family. This assignment to the Welsh frontier, far from the excitement and opportunity of London, is the consequence. He is supposed to spend 2 years here, learning discipline and regretting his choices. Edmund's chamber is silent, but Thomas has learned to distinguish different types of silence. This isn't the silence of deep sleep. It is the silence of someone lying awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about choices and consequences and the life they've lost. Thomas recognizes this silence because he has heard it before from other young men sent here in disgrace. Some eventually adapt and make something of their exile. They learn to appreciate the slower pace, the different challenges, the chance to build competence and reputation away from the critical eyes of court. Others never adapt. They spend their entire time here bitter and resentful, counting the days until they can leave. It is too early to tell which type Edmund will be, but Thomas makes a mental note to keep an eye on him. Bitter, resentful young men with nothing to lose can be dangerous. They make poor decisions. They take risks they shouldn't. They become security vulnerabilities. At the end of the corridor is what Thomas privately thinks of as the problem room. Currently it houses a 16-year-old girl named Lady Catherine, daughter of a wealthy baron. Catherine has been sent here for what her father's letter described as correction of willful and disobedient behaviour. In modern terms, Catherine is being punished for being a rebellious teenager. She apparently defied her parents about something serious enough that they decided exile to a remote Welsh castle was appropriate discipline. Catherine is not allowed to leave the castle under any circumstances. She is not allowed visitors, except explicitly approved family members. She is essentially a prisoner, though no one uses that word because she is nobility. She has comfortable chambers, good food, servants to attend her needs, but she can't leave, can't see her friends, can't go home. For a teenage girl who presumably grew up with freedom and privilege, this must be psychological torture. Thomas pauses at her door and hears something that makes his heart ache despite himself. Crying. Quiet, muffled crying. The sound of someone weeping into a pillow, trying not to be heard. She has probably been crying like this every night since she arrived 2 weeks ago. Thomas has a daughter not much younger than Catherine, and the sound of her distress affects him more than it should. He doesn't knock, doesn't offer comfort. That is not his role. And besides, what could he possibly say? He is part of the system keeping her confined. Sympathy from him would be worse than useless. So he just stands there for a moment, listening to her cry, feeling a complex mixture of pity and duty, and then he moves on. Whatever Catherine did to deserve this punishment, She is paying for it now. This might seem harsh to modern readers, and in many ways it is harsh. But we need to understand the medieval context here. According to Dr. Shulamith Shahar's extensive research on childhood in the Middle Ages, teenagers had extremely limited autonomy. Marriages were arranged by parents based on political and economic considerations. Career paths were largely determined by birth and family connections. Rebellion against parental authority wasn't just considered wrong or disrespectful. It was viewed as potentially sinful, a violation of God's ordained hierarchy, where children owe absolute obedience to parents. Catherine's imprisonment might seem cruel and excessive to us, but to her contemporaries it was a reasonable and moderate parental response to serious disobedience. The alternatives could have been much worse: being disowned and losing all family support, being married off to someone terrible as punishment, being sent to a convent for life. Compared to those possibilities, a few months in a castle, even a remote Welsh castle, was actually relatively gentle discipline. Thomas continues his rounds, descending back to the middle levels. He has been on duty for 5 hours now, and he is settling into the familiar rhythm of the work. Walk, listen, check, move on. Walk, listen, check, move on. Walk, listen, check, move on. It is meditative in a way, this constant movement through familiar spaces. His mind can wander a bit while his body performs practiced routines. He thinks about his wife Anne, probably asleep by now in their small house in the town. He thinks about his daughters, 7 and 5 years old, probably sprawled across their shared bed in positions that look uncomfortable but somehow work for children. He thinks about the garden he wants to plant next spring. He thinks about whether he'll live long enough to retire from this job, to spend his nights sleeping like a normal person instead of walking through darkness. Midnight approaches, and Thomas can feel it in his bones more than know it intellectually. There are no clocks in the castle, no way to measure time precisely, but the body knows. After 7 years of night watch, Thomas's internal clock has become remarkably accurate. He has learned to estimate time by the position of the stars, by the depth of the cold, by the quality of the silence. And right now, everything in his body is telling him that midnight is close. He makes his way to the castle chapel, a small chamber on the middle level that barely qualifies as a proper chapel. It is about 20 feet square, with a simple stone altar, a dozen wooden benches for seating, and religious icons painted directly onto the plaster walls. The chapel is technically always open for prayer, but at night it is rarely used, except at midnight, because at midnight something specific happens. Thomas arrives just as Brother Martin enters through the opposite door. Martin is the castle's chaplain, a Benedictine monk who serves as spiritual advisor to the garrison and conducts religious services for the castle community. He is a small man, maybe 5 foot 4 inches, with the kind of deeply weathered face that could be anywhere from 40 to 60 years old. Years of living in cold, drafty religious buildings have left him with a permanent raspy quality to his voice. Martin lives by strict monastic rules, even though he is not technically in a monastery. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governs Benedictine life, requires monks to pray at specific times throughout the day and night. These prayer times are called the Divine Office or Liturgy of the Hours, Matins at midnight, Lauds at dawn, Prime at sunrise, Terce at mid-morning, Sext at noon, None at mid-afternoon, Vespers at sunset, and Compline before bed. Martin observes all of these, structuring his entire day around prayer. He never misses them, not for illness, not for weather, not for any reason short of death. "Good evening, Thomas," Martin says quietly, his raspy voice barely above a whisper. "How goes the watch?" "All quiet so far, brother. God is watching over us." "God is always watching," Martin agrees with the absolute certainty of deep faith. He begins lighting candles on the altar using a taper he has brought with him, small candles that will burn for the duration of his prayers. "Will you pray with me tonight?" This is a ritual they have. Martin asks every night they encounter each other. Thomas usually declines politely because he is on duty, and prayer would be a distraction from vigilance. But tonight, for reasons he can't quite articulate, reasons that have something to do with the crying girl and the dead woman on the road and the weight of 7 years of holding back the darkness, Thomas nods. Brief prayers, he says. I need to continue my rounds soon. They kneel together on the cold stone floor, and the chill immediately seeps through Thomas's wool trousers into his knees. Martin begins chanting in Latin, ancient words that Thomas has heard thousands of times, but never fully understood. Domin labia me aperis, et os mum annunciabit laudem tuam. Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall proclaim your praise. The words wash over Thomas, familiar and comforting, even without full comprehension. Martin's prayers continue in Latin, the universal language of medieval Christianity. He prays for King Edward. He prays for the castle garrison and all who serve here. He prays for protection through the night, for safety from visible and invisible dangers. And then, unexpectedly, he switches to English and prays specifically for all those who watch while others sleep, who guard against dangers unseen, who sacrifice their rest and comfort so others may dream in peace. Thomas feels his throat tighten unexpectedly, emotion rising up from somewhere deep. It is rare, vanishingly rare, that anyone acknowledges the work he does, the genuine sacrifice it requires. Most people take the night watch for granted. They sleep safely and never think about who is walking the corridors, checking the locks, listening for danger. They wake in the morning and continue their lives without ever considering that their safety was purchased by someone else's sleepless vigilance. The prayers end. Martin makes the sign of the cross, touching forehead, chest, left shoulder, right shoulder in the ancient gesture of faith. Thomas does the same, more from habit and respect than deep religious conviction. He believes in God the way he believes in the sun. It is there whether you think about it or not. But true faith, the kind Martin has, that burns bright and constant regardless of circumstances, that is always eluded Thomas. He envies it sometimes. They stand, knees, protesting after even this brief time on cold stone. Martin gathers his candle taper, preparing to return to his small cell, where he'll continue private prayers and devotions until dawn. Thank you, brother, Thomas says. Thank you, Thomas, Martin responds, and there is genuine warmth in his raspy voice. You protect our bodies while I pray for our souls. We each have our watch to keep, different duties, same purpose, bringing light to the darkness. It is a nice sentiment, poetic even, and Thomas nods appreciation before leaving through the main door. The chapel feels different now, charged somehow with the residue of prayer and candlelight and shared humanity. Or maybe that is just Thomas's imagination, his mind finding meaning in empty spaces because humans need meaning like they need air. The door latch clicks as Thomas pulls it closed, and the sound seems too loud in the midnight stillness. Second watch begins now. This is the heart of the night, the deepest darkness, the time when Thomas needs to be most alert. Fatigue is starting to set in, a familiar heaviness in his limbs and behind his eyes, but he pushes through it. He has hours more to go, and second watch is when dangers are most likely to manifest. He decides to check on his assistant watchman to make sure they're awake and vigilant and not succumbing to the exhaustion that creeps up on everyone during these midnight hours. John, the young watchman, is where he is supposed to be, but Thomas can tell immediately that the kid is struggling. His eyes are heavy, his stance too relaxed, leaning against the wall. When Thomas approaches, it takes John a full 2 seconds to register his presence, to snap to attention. That is too long, way too long. In a genuine emergency, that 2-second delay could mean death. John, Thomas says sharply, his voice cutting through the young man's fog. Walk with me now. This is the remedy for fatigue that Thomas learned from his own mentor years ago. Movement sitting still or standing in one place allows sleep to creep up on you, to overwhelm your defenses. Moving forces the body to stay alert, forces blood to circulate, forces the mind to engage. Thomas learned this the hard way during his own first year, falling asleep on his feet and waking to find his mentor standing in front of him, disappointed and angry. He vowed never to let it happen again, and he hasn't, and he is determined that his own team won't either. They walk together through the corridors at a brisk pace, Thomas deliberately setting a speed that is just slightly uncomfortable, fast enough to get John's heart pumping and blood moving. "Tell me about your family," Thomas says as they walk. This is another trick he learned. Conversation keeps the mind engaged, prevents it from drifting into that dangerous twilight state between waking and sleeping. John talks about his father, who is a carpenter in the town, reasonably skilled and making decent money. His mother died 2 years ago from a fever, one of those medieval deaths that was probably preventable with modern medicine, but was inevitably fatal in their world. His younger sister, Margaret, a different Margaret from the laundress, it is a common name, who John is helping to support with his Watchman wages. She is 14 years old and working as a servant in a merchant's household. It is a common story, neither particularly tragic nor particularly hopeful, just normal medieval life where death is commonplace and survival requires constant effort from everyone. John's father makes decent money, but not enough to support 2 children on his own. So John works to help. When his sister is old enough, maybe 16 or 17, they'll arrange a marriage for her, hopefully to someone decent who'll provide stability and safety. That is the best most people can hope for. Survival, basic comfort, and someone decent to share your life with. As they walk and talk, Thomas hears something that makes him stop abruptly. It is a sound from above, from the floor directly over their current position. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone pacing. This wouldn't necessarily be concerning, except that everyone should be asleep at this hour. Everyone except Thomas and his designated watchmen, who are all accounted for. "Stay here," Thomas whispers to John, his voice suddenly tense. "If I am not back in 5 minutes, use your whistle. Raise the alarm, understand?" John nods, suddenly wide awake now. All trace of fatigue vanished in the face of potential danger. Fear is a remarkably effective stimulant. Thomas climbs the nearest staircase quickly but quietly, moving with practiced stealth. The footsteps above have stopped now, which is somehow more concerning than if they'd continued. Whoever was walking has either stopped moving or realized they've been heard. Thomas reaches the upper corridor and pauses at the top of the stairs, listening intently. Nothing. Just the usual night sounds, wind outside, settling stone, distant snoring from sleeping chambers. But someone was definitely walking up here. He is certain of it. After 7 years of doing this job, he trusts his hearing absolutely. Thomas begins a methodical search of the corridor, moving slowly, checking each door, all closed, all with the latches down, indicating they're secured from the inside. He reaches Lady Catherine's chamber and pauses. Is that sound coming from inside her room? He listens more intently. Yes, movement. Someone pacing back and forth inside. Footsteps on the wooden floor. Thomas knocks softly on the door, just loud enough to be heard inside, but not loud enough to wake other sleepers. "My lady, is everything all right?" The footsteps stop immediately, long pause, long enough that Thomas is about to knock again. Then a voice, young and strained. "I am fine, just I can't sleep." Thomas considers this. Catherine being awake and pacing, too upset to sleep. That is not against any rules. She is in her room where she is supposed to be, but the sound he heard was in the corridor, not inside a room. Or was it? Sounds travel strangely in stone buildings, bouncing off walls, coming from unexpected directions. Maybe he was mistaken about the locations. "Try to rest, my lady," Thomas says through the closed door. "Dawn will come soon enough, and a new day with it." No response. Thomas waits another moment, then continues his search, checking the entire floor twice with increasing thoroughness. No open doors, no hidden intruders. No windows left unlatched, no explanation for what he heard. This bothers him more than finding an actual problem would have. Problems can be solved, confronted, dealt with. Mysteries just create anxiety, uncertainty, doubt. Did he really hear footsteps in the corridor? Or did he hear someone inside a room and his tired mind misidentified the location? Is someone moving around who shouldn't be? Or is this just the castle settling, making sounds his experience is misinterpreting as human footsteps? He returns to John, who is visibly relieved to see Thomas emerge from the stairwell. "Everything all right, sir?" "I thought I heard something," Thomas says, keeping his voice neutral. "Probably just the building settling or someone inside their room who couldn't sleep, but stay alert. If you hear anything unusual, anything at all, signal me immediately." "Yes, sir, will do, sir." Thomas resumes his rounds, but the incident bothers him. He tries to shake off the uneasy feeling, but it persists. This is one of the challenges of night watch that no amount of experience fully resolves. Your senses become hyperactive, your threat detection systems running at maximum sensitivity, and you start interpreting every small sound as potential danger. It is exhausting, this constant state of alertness. But it is also necessary because the one time you dismiss a sound as probably nothing might be the time it is actually something lethal. Let me tell you about an incident that happened at a different castle, Kidwelly Castle in South Wales, about 20 years before Thomas's time. This story became famous enough that every night watchman in Wales knew it, passed down as a cautionary tale about the deadly consequences of dismissing anomalies. There was a guard named Walter who heard sounds in the castle cellars one night. Strange scraping noises like metal on stone, like someone digging. Walter investigated the first night, went down to the cellars with his lantern, looked around carefully, found nothing unusual, just empty chambers and stored goods. He dismissed it as rats, or maybe sound carrying from outside in a weird way. The next night, same sounds, scraping, digging, coming from the cellars. Walter checked again found nothing, went back to his rounds. The third night, fourth night, fifth night, same thing. After a week of this, Walter stopped checking, because obviously it was just rats or the building settling, or water dripping somewhere or something harmless. It couldn't be a real threat because he'd investigated multiple times and never found anything, so he learned to ignore it, to filter it out as background noise. It wasn't rats, it wasn't harmless. It was a group of Welsh insurgents who discovered an old drainage tunnel that led from outside the castle to the cellars. They were widening that tunnel, carefully, slowly removing stones and dirt inch by inch. They worked at night when guards were tired and sounds were dismissed. They were patient, taking weeks to make the tunnel wide enough for armed men to crawl through. On the 8th night of strange sounds, they broke through. The tunnel opened into the castle cellars. 30 armed men poured through that opening at 2 a.m, during deepest sleep of second watch. The castle was almost taken, almost completely overwhelmed. Only luck saved them, pure random chance. A kitchen servant couldn't sleep and went to the cellars to get wine, thinking alcohol might help him rest. He stumbled onto the raiders in the darkness and managed to scream before they cut his throat. His scream woke the garrison. Knights grabbed weapons. Guards rallied. They fought off the attack in brutal close quarters, combat in dark corridors. But 14 people died, including 3 women and 1 child who were in the wrong place when the fighting erupted. And Walter, the guard who'd heard the sounds and dismissed them, he died too. According to the castle records that survived, Walter was so consumed with guilt, so devastated by his failure, that he deliberately positioned himself in the most dangerous part of the fighting. Witnesses said he fought without a shield, without armor, making no attempt to protect himself. He died within minutes, cut down by Welsh blades, and some said he welcomed death as punishment for his failure. The lesson was clear and brutal, and it is taught to every new night watchman. There is no such thing as probably nothing. On night watch, every sound, every anomaly, every deviation from normal deserves investigation. Complacency kills. Dismissing warnings kills. You investigate until you understand the source of every sound, or you raise the alarm if you can't explain it. Those are the only acceptable options. Thomas has internalized this lesson so thoroughly, so completely, that he sometimes wonders if he is incapable of relaxation anymore. even during the day when he is supposed to be sleeping, when his exhausted body desperately needs rest. Part of his mind remains alert, always listening, always ready for threats. Anne has mentioned this, worried about him, said he even tenses up in his sleep when there is an unexpected noise. He can't help it. 7 years of hypervigilance has rewired his brain, made him into someone who can never fully relax. It is approaching 1 in the morning now, deep in second watch, and Thomas is due for his inspection of the castle's most sensitive area, the postern gate. Every castle this size has 2 entrances, the main gate that everyone knows about, massive and heavily fortified, and a smaller secondary entrance called a postern gate. The postern gate is located on the castle's north side, away from the main approach, partially hidden by the curve of the walls. It is used for discreet comings and goings, messengers who need to arrive or depart without everyone knowing, supply deliveries that bypass the main gate, emergency exits if the castle is under siege and people need to escape. The postern gate is much smaller than the main gate, just wide enough for 1 person at a time, maybe 2 if they squeeze, but despite its size it represents a critical security vulnerability. If someone wanted to infiltrate the castle, if someone inside wanted to betray the castle by letting enemies in quietly, the postern gate would be their target. It is smaller, less visible, generally less guarded than the main gate. Perfect for treachery. So the postern gate has its own elaborate security system. It is locked with 2 massive iron bolts and a complex lock mechanism that requires 3 separate keys. Thomas has 1 key on his key ring. The constable, Lord Richard, has the 2nd key, and the 3rd key is kept in the castle treasury, a locked strongbox that requires authorization from 2 officers to open. This means the postern gate is effectively impossible to open from either side without cooperation and consensus from multiple people. It is security through distributed authority, the same principle as the 7 locks on the main gate. Thomas arrives at the postern gate and begins his systematic inspection, following a checklist he has performed thousands of times. First, he checks the iron bolts, making absolutely sure they're fully engaged and haven't been tampered with. He runs his fingers along the bolts, feeling for scratches or marks that might indicate someone tried to force them. Nothing unusual. Second, he checks the lock mechanism itself, looking for scratches around the keyhole or damage that might indicate someone attempted to pick it. The lock looks clean. Third, he checks the hinges on the inside, making sure they haven't been oiled or loosened, which would make the door easier to open quickly and quietly. The hinges are stiff as they should be. Finally, he presses his ear against the cold iron-bound wood and listens for any sound from outside. This is important because sometimes attackers will test gates, examining them from outside, looking for weaknesses. If Thomas can hear people moving outside, talking, working, that is a sign of potential attack being planned. But tonight he hears nothing except wind, distant wind blowing across the hills. The gate is secure, but as Thomas is about to leave, satisfied with his inspection, he notices something that makes his blood run cold, makes his heart suddenly pound hard in his chest. There are scratches on the stone floor near the base of the door. Not old scratches darkened with accumulated dirt and age. Fresh scratches, light-coloured stone exposed where something has scraped across the floor, cutting through centuries of accumulated grime. These scratches run from the base of the door to the nearby wall, about 3 feet of visible scraping. Thomas kneels immediately, setting his lantern down carefully and examining the scratches more closely. They're shallow, barely visible even in direct lantern light, but definitely recent. Very recent, maybe within the last few days. What could cause this? Someone dragging something heavy. But who, and when, and why? Why would anyone be moving something heavy near the postern gate? He follows the scratches to where they end at the wall. The wall here looks completely normal at first glance. Just stone and mortar, ancient and solid. But wait, Thomas looks closer, running his fingers over the surface. There is a small gap in the mortar between two stones. It is barely visible, narrow as a knife blade, and it might be natural deterioration from centuries of weather and time, or it might be something else. Thomas probes the gap with the tip of his dagger, applying gentle pressure. The mortar crumbles too easily, way too easily. Mortar that has been in place for decades becomes hard as stone, harder even. It doesn't crumble when you poke it, but this mortar disintegrates under minimal pressure, falling away in small chunks. This has been deliberately dug out, carefully removed, made to look intact from casual observation, but actually weakened, compromised. Thomas's heart is racing now, his mind working through implications and scenarios. Someone has been tampering with the wall near the postern gate. This is exactly the kind of thing that precedes a breach attempt, an infiltration, an attack. Someone has been working on this wall, probably at night when guards are tired and people are asleep. They've been removing mortar, weakening the structure, creating a vulnerability that can be exploited later. He needs to investigate further, but he also needs to raise the alarm. Protocol says alarm first, investigate second. When you find evidence of security breach, you raise the alarm immediately and let others handle the investigation with full support. But if he raises the alarm right now, if he wakes the entire castle over some scratches and loose mortar, and it turns out to be nothing or something explainable, he'll look like an idiot. The constable doesn't appreciate false alarms. The garrison doesn't appreciate being woken unnecessarily. Thomas's credibility, built over 7 years of reliable service, could be damaged, but the lesson of Walter and the Welsh raiders echoes in Thomas's mind. Better a dozen false alarms than one real danger missed. He is about to reach for his rattle, about to spin it and raise the alarm, when he decides to do just slightly more investigation, just enough to confirm this is real, to have concrete evidence he can show the constable. Just a minute more of checking. Thomas begins probing the wall systematically, testing stones for looseness, checking mortar in multiple places. Most of the wall is solid as it should be. But there is one stone, roughly waist height, about the size of a human head, that moves slightly when he pushes it. Not much, just a tiny shift, a subtle give that shouldn't be there. Stone walls don't move, but this stone does, barely perceptibly, because someone has been working on it, removing the mortar around it, preparing to take it out entirely. This is real. This is genuine security breach in progress. Thomas's mind races through the implications, through possible scenarios and responses. If someone is removing stones from the inside wall, they're planning to create an opening that connects to the outside, a hidden entrance, a way for people to get in without using the gates. And if they're working from the inside, that means there is a traitor in the castle, someone with access and opportunity, someone who has been coming down here at night, maybe while Thomas was checking other areas, carefully chipping away mortar, grain by grain, creating a weakness that will eventually become a catastrophic failure point. Thomas needs to raise the alarm immediately, but he also wants evidence, wants to understand how extensive this tampering is. He takes his dagger and carefully widens the gap in the mortar, trying to see how deep the cavity goes. The blade sinks in easily, far deeper than it should, deeper than any normal mortar joint. Someone has removed mortar from between multiple stones, creating a cavity inside the wall itself, hidden from casual observation. This isn't casual damage from time and weather. This is sophisticated sabotage, carefully planned and patiently executed. That is when Thomas hears it, a sound behind him. Footsteps approaching quickly, urgently, someone moving fast through the corridor. Thomas spins around, his hand dropping instinctively to the dagger at his belt. But he is not fast enough, not prepared enough. Something hits him across the back of the head, a stunning blow that explodes white light behind his eyes and drops him immediately to his knees. Pain detonates through his skull, radiating outward in waves of agony. He tries to turn, tries to see his attacker, tries to defend himself. but another blow catches him on the shoulder, hard enough to feel bones creak, and he falls completely. His face hits the stone floor, and he tastes blood immediately. His lips split against his teeth. Someone is standing over him. Through the fog of pain and confusion, Thomas can see boots, expensive leather boots, well made, the kind a servant or common soldier wouldn't own. These are noble boots, or at least boots belonging to someone with money. A voice speaks, distorted by the ringing in Thomas's ears, sounding like it is coming from underwater. "You should have minded your own business, Watchman." Thomas tries to speak, tries to shout for help, tries to call out for John, who is supposed to be nearby, but his voice won't work properly, just a croaking whisper that wouldn't carry beyond 10 feet. His vision is going dark around the edges, grey fog creeping inward. He is losing consciousness, and he knows with terrible crystal clarity that if he passes out now, he might never wake up. The person standing over him can kill him easily while he is unconscious. He fights it with everything he has, biting his own tongue hard, using the fresh spike of pain to stay focused. The person above him is doing something at the postern gate. Thomas can hear the rattle of keys, the metallic scrape of bolts being drawn back. They're opening the gate. They're letting someone in. This is it. This is the attack that every night Watchman fears. This is the moment when all your vigilance fails, when the threat you've been watching for actually materializes, and you are helpless to stop it. But Thomas isn't completely helpless. Not yet. With a massive effort that feels like lifting a mountain, Thomas reaches for the wooden rattle at his belt. His fingers are clumsy, his coordination failing, his hand shaking uncontrollably, but he manages to grip the rattle, pull it free of his belt. He raises his arm, draws breath into lungs that don't want to work, and spins the rattle with all his remaining strength. The sound that erupts is harsh, loud, cutting through the midnight silence like a scream, the chattering of wood on wood, amplified by stone corridors, impossibly loud. It is the sound of alarm, the sound that means the castle is under attack, the sound that Thomas has tested 1,000 times, but never used for real until this moment. And it is the sound that saves his life, because his attacker, whoever they are, runs. Thomas hears boots pounding away, rapid footsteps receding down the corridor. He hears a curse, a single word in a voice he almost recognizes, almost identifies through the fog of pain and confusion, but he can't quite place it, can't quite make the connection his concussed brain is trying to form. The postern gate is still closed, Thomas realizes with dim relief. The bolts had been drawn back, but the gate itself hadn't been opened yet. The traitor didn't have enough time. The rattle worked. Thomas did his job. And with that thought, with that small victory, he finally allows the darkness to take him, lets consciousness slip away. Thomas wakes to firelight and voices and pain. His head feels like someone is driving iron spikes into his skull with a hammer. His mouth tastes of blood, bile, and something metallic and wrong. But he is alive, and from the anxious faces looking down at him, he is surrounded by friends and allies. "Easy, Thomas," a familiar voice says. It is Peter, his fellow watchman, his experienced colleague. "You took a nasty hit. Don't try to move too quickly." Memory floods back immediately. The postern gate, the sabotaged wall, the attack. Thomas tries to sit up despite Peter's advice, and immediately regrets it as the world spins sickeningly, as his stomach lurches in revolt. Peter and another guard steady him, hands on his shoulders, keeping him from falling. The gate, Thomas gasps, his voice raspy and strange to his own ears. Summono tried to open it, someone inside. "A traitor. We know," a new voice says, and Thomas focuses his blurred vision to see Lord Richard himself, the constable, standing nearby. Richard is fully dressed despite the hour, his face grim and set, a commander dealing with crisis. "Your alarm woke the castle. We found the gate with the bolts drawn but still closed. And we found your evidence in the wall, the sabotage, the removed mortar. You were right. Who was it?" Thomas asks urgently. "Did you catch them?" Lord Richard shakes his head, and Thomas sees genuine anger and frustration in the older man's face. "Not yet, but we will. You probably saved us from a coordinated attack, Thomas. If that gate had been opened, if enemies had poured in during second watch when everyone's asleep," he doesn't finish the sentence, he doesn't need to. "Everyone in this room knows what would have happened. Slaughter, overwhelming surprise attack, the castle taken, dozens dead, maybe everyone dead." Thomas is helped to his feet, though the room continues to spin alarmingly and his legs feel weak and unreliable. Brother Martin appears seemingly from nowhere, carrying clean cloth and a bowl of water. Martin begins cleaning the wound on Thomas's head with surprising gentleness for someone with such rough, weathered hands. "You'll have a magnificent lump," Martin observes clinically, probing the injury with practiced fingers. "But the skull seems intact, thank God. No soft spots, no depression. You are lucky, Thomas. Another inch to the left and this blow would have killed you instantly." "God was watching over you," Martin adds, wringing out the cloth and applying it again to Thomas's matted, bloody hair. "Or perhaps Saint Christopher, patron of those in danger. You were protected." "God and my thick Welsh head," Thomas mutters, which gets a few chuckles from the gathered men, breaking the tension slightly. But the mood remains serious grim, because everyone understands the implications of what happened. Someone in the castle is a traitor. Someone tried to kill Thomas. Someone was planning to open the gate to let enemies in, and that someone is still here, hiding among them, pretending to be innocent. Lord Richard begins issuing orders immediately, his military training and experience taking over. Every person in the castle must be woken and accounted for immediately, no exceptions. Every chamber must be searched thoroughly, furniture moved, possessions examined. Every person must be questioned about their whereabouts. They're looking for someone with fresh blood on their clothes, someone with scratches or marks from a fight, someone acting suspiciously. It is going to be chaos, the kind of comprehensive disruption that Thomas's careful watch is meant to prevent. But it is necessary chaos, because a traitor inside the walls is more dangerous than any enemy outside. The investigation continues for hours, well into what should be third watch. The entire castle is woken, 300 people roused from sleep and assembled in the great hall for accounting and questioning. Children cry from the disruption. Women look terrified, not understanding what is happening. Men grab weapons reflexively, soldiers' instincts taking over. The castle has transformed from sleeping community into something closer to a military camp under siege. Thomas, despite his injury, despite the throbbing agony in his head and the nausea that keeps threatening to overwhelm him, insists on participating in the investigation. He walks through the assembled inhabitants, studying faces, looking for guilt or fear or anything that might identify the attacker. But everyone looks guilty in some way. Everyone looks afraid. Fear is contagious, especially in a confined space at night, especially when trust has been shattered. They find nothing immediately conclusive. No one is obviously missing from the assembly, which means the traitor is here, standing among the innocent, hiding in plain sight. No one has visible blood on their clothing, though of course someone guilty would have had time to change clothes or hide blood-stained garments. No one acts in an obviously suspicious manner, though nervous behaviour is universal, because being questioned by angry guards in the middle of the night makes everyone nervous regardless of innocence. The expensive boots Thomas remembered seeing. At least 20 people in the castle own boots of similar quality. Knights, officers, wealthy merchants, skilled craftsmen who can afford quality footwear. It is not enough to narrow down suspects. The voice Thomas almost recognized. He still can't place it, can't make the connection. His concussed brain holds the memory but won't release it, like trying to remember a name that is on the tip of your tongue. As dawn approaches, as the investigation continues without breakthrough, Lord Richard makes a difficult decision. The castle will be locked down completely. No one enters, no one leaves. This applies to everyone, without exception. Merchants who had planned to depart this morning will stay. Messengers will be delayed. Servants who live in the town but work in the castle won't be allowed to go home. Everyone stays inside until the traitor is identified and dealt with. It is essentially turning the entire castle into a prison, trapping innocent and guilty together. But given the circumstances, given the evidence of planned attack and internal betrayal, it is the only rational choice. Thomas finally sits down in the great hall as dawn light begins filtering through the high windows, grey and weak but undeniably real. Morning. He made it through another night, barely, battered and hurting but alive. His head throbs with every heartbeat, a pounding rhythm of pain. His body aches everywhere. He has been awake for nearly 12 hours, most of them spent in fear or pain or desperate investigation. But he is alive. The castle is still secure. The attack was prevented. By any reasonable measure, he has done his job successfully, even heroically. Anne, his wife, arrives as soon as the castle gates open at dawn. Word has spread to the town somehow, rumours flying faster than birds. She must have heard about the attack, about Thomas being injured, because she arrives running, breathless, her face white with terror. When she sees Thomas sitting there in the great hall, battered and bloodied but alive and conscious, she runs to him and embraces him with desperate force. She doesn't say anything at first. She doesn't need to. Her presence, her warmth, her trembling relief, they communicate everything necessary. "I am all right," Thomas tells her, though his voice is hoarse and exhausted, and his words are somewhat slurred from the head injury. "I am all right, Anne. Still here." "You are a fool," Anne says into his shoulder, her voice breaking with emotion, with fear and relief warring for dominance. "This cursed job will kill you someday. Maybe not today, but someday. And then what? What happens to me and the girls?" "I know," Thomas says quietly, honestly, "but what I want doesn't matter here. There is a traitor in this castle, someone planning to let enemies in, someone who would have gotten hundreds of people killed. If I don't stop them, a lot of people will die. People we know, Margaret and her children, Brother Martin and his prayers, all the servants and craftsmen and guards. They trust me to keep them safe." "And who keeps you safe?" Anne demands, pulling back to look at him directly, her eyes fierce and wet. Who protects the protector? It is a question without a good answer. Thomas has his skills, his training, his vigilance, but at the end of the day, he walks alone through dark corridors for 12 hours every night. And if someone wants to kill him, they'll have plenty of opportunities to try. He is acutely aware of this now in a way he wasn't before last night. The job he has done for 7 years has always been dangerous in theory. Now it is dangerous in practice, demonstrated with a blow to the head and blood on stone floors. "God keeps me safe," Thomas says, though he doesn't entirely believe it anymore. "And my thick head, and the training I've done, and luck. I need a lot of luck." Anne doesn't smile at the attempt to lighten the mood. She just looks at him with eyes full of love and fear and resignation. She knows he is going back tonight. She knows she can't stop him. She knows that every night from now on, she'll go to bed wondering if he'll come home in the morning, if this will be the night his luck runs out. Thomas embraces her again, holding her as tightly as his injured shoulder allows, trying to convey everything he can't put into words. He loves her. He knows this is hard for her. He wishes things were different, but they're not different. This is the life they have, the job he does, the sacrifice required. They hold each other as the great hall fills with morning light and the castle slowly transforms back from crisis mode into its day configuration. Over the following days, as Thomas recovers from his injuries, as the lump on his head slowly subsides from egg size to merely visible, the castle remains in lockdown. The investigation continues, relentless and thorough. Lord Richard interrogates everyone personally, spending hours with each person of interest. He is looking for motive first, who has reason to betray the castle, who is dissatisfied or resentful or desperate enough to commit treason. He is looking for opportunity second, who has freedom of movement at night, who could access the postern gate area without being questioned, who has the skills to remove mortar carefully and quietly. He is looking for means third, who has tools that could be used for this work, who has keys or access to keys, who has connections outside the castle that might explain coordination with external forces. The answer, when it finally comes after 3 days of intensive investigation, surprises Thomas completely. It is not a disgruntled servant or a foreign spy or a Welsh infiltrator. It is Sir Edmund, the young knight who was exiled here for his romantic indiscretion. Edmund who seemed bitter but harmless. Edmund who wore expensive boots. Edmund whose voice Thomas almost recognized through the fog of concussion. Under intense interrogation, psychological pressure, and eventually the threat of torture, though torture is never actually applied because Edmund breaks before it comes to that. He confesses. The story that emerges is pathetic and infuriating in equal measure. Edmund was promised clemency and early return to London if he would facilitate a raid on the castle. Someone at court, someone with power and connections that Edmund never fully identified, or maybe never actually knew, had arranged this as a way to embarrass King Edward by showing that even his newest, strongest castle could be compromised. Edmund was desperate to escape his exile, desperate to return to the life and prospects he'd lost through his own poor choices. He was young enough and stupid enough to believe the promises made to him by intermediaries and messages. He didn't think about the logical consequences. He didn't consider that conspirators who arrange treason rarely keep their promises to traitors. He didn't think about the hundreds of people who would die if his plan succeeded. He was focused entirely on his own desires, his own redemption, his own return to favour. Thomas is present when Edmund is brought before Lord Richard for final judgment. The young knight looks terrible, broken by 3 days of interrogation and the crushing weight of his own guilt. Edmund looks at Thomas, makes eye contact, and Thomas sees genuine remorse there. But remorse doesn't undo what was done, doesn't make attempted mass murder acceptable. "I wasn't trying to kill you," Edmund says to Thomas, his voice small and desperate, "just knock you out long enough to open the gate. I am not a murderer." Thomas considers this for a long moment before responding. When he speaks, his voice is cold, harder than Edmund has probably ever heard. "You were planning to let in armed men who would murder dozens of people in their sleep. Women, children, unarmed servants. What do you think that makes you?" Edmund has no answer to that. He has no defence, no justification that holds any weight. He just stands there, a 22-year-old man who threw away his life for a promise that was never going to be kept. The sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out immediately. According to medieval law and custom regarding treason, this is not just justice but necessity. You cannot imprison traitors safely because they might escape or be rescued. You cannot ransom them because who would pay for a traitor? You cannot exile them because they'll just come back with enemies. The only solution that removes the threat permanently is execution. 3 days after his confession, Sir Edmund is taken to the castle courtyard for execution. The entire garrison is required to attend, witness, and remember. This is meant as deterrent, as education, as demonstration of the consequences of betrayal. Thomas is there, standing with Anne and the other castle staff, watching justice being administered. He feels no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just a tired sadness at the waste of it all. Edmund was 22 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him, decades of potential service and achievement, and he threw it all away for a lie, a promise that was never going to be kept. Lady Catherine is also present, forced to attend by explicit orders from her father, delivered by messenger. This is meant as educational, a harsh lesson about consequences and obedience. Thomas sees Catherine standing near the front of the crowd, her face white, her body rigid. She is 16 years old and being forced to watch a man die, a man not much older than herself. Thomas watches her as the execution proceeds, sees horror bloom on her face, sees her turn away and vomit, her body rejecting the violence and cruelty of this lesson. Edmund dies badly. Hanging is supposed to be quick if done correctly, the fall breaking the neck instantly. But something goes wrong. Maybe the rope is too long, or Edmund's weight is misjudged. or the drop isn't high enough. He doesn't die instantly. He struggles at the rope's end, choking, kicking, his face turning purple. It takes 7 minutes that feel like hours. 7 minutes of struggling and choking and slowly suffocating while 300 people watch. Some people turn away. Others force themselves to keep watching. Thomas watches because he feels obligated to witness the consequences of what happened. The final chapter of the story that almost ended with him dead on cold stone. When it is finally over, when Edmund's body stops twitching and hangs still, when Brother Martin has said the final prayers for the deceased traitor's soul, the crowd slowly disperses. People return to their duties quietly, soberly, processing what they've witnessed. Catherine disappears immediately, and Thomas later hears she was sick for the rest of the day, unable to eat, traumatized by what she was forced to see. Life in the castle eventually returns to normal, or as normal as it gets after a crisis like this. The lockdown is lifted after another week. Once Lord Richard is satisfied, there are no other conspirators. The postern gate is permanently sealed, filled completely with rubble and faced over with new stonework that will take decades to harden to the strength of the original walls. It is no longer worth the security risk, the potential vulnerability. The castle now has only one entrance, the main gate, and that entrance is guarded with even more paranoid intensity than before. Thomas returns to night watch after 5 days of recovery. His head still hurts, probably will hurt for weeks. He has a permanent scar now, a raised line of tissue where the wound was deepest, but he is alive and functional and determined to continue his duty. His first night back feels strange, surreal, walking the same corridors where he was attacked, checking the postern gate that is now sealed forever. But it also feels necessary, like he is reclaiming these spaces, refusing to be driven away by fear. Peter walks with him the first few nights, following Lord Richard's new policy that watchmen work in pairs when possible. The isolation is reduced. The job is safer, but Thomas finds he misses the solitary aspect of it, the time alone with his thoughts. He supposes that is something he'll have to adjust to. Weeks pass. Winter comes in earnest, harsh and cold, making night watch even more miserable than usual. Thomas walks his rounds in snow and ice, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, his feet going numb despite thick wool socks and leather boots. But he walks every night, every watch, holding back the darkness, keeping people safe, earning his 4 pence, now increased to 6 pence on Lord Richard's orders. The raise is significant, appreciated, a recognition of valour and dedication. It means his family will eat a bit better, have slightly warmer clothes, maybe save a bit of money for emergencies. And here is what I want you to understand about Thomas's story, about the story of every night watchman in every castle and village and town throughout medieval Europe. They were doing something that we in the modern world take completely for granted, something so fundamental to our lives that we never even think about it. They were creating security. They were making it possible for people to sleep without fear. They were holding the social order together during the hours when it was most vulnerable to collapse. We have police now, professional law enforcement with training and backup and authority. We have alarm systems connected to monitoring stations. We have streetlights that banish darkness from public spaces. We have locks designed by engineers and tested for security. We have 911 operators who can dispatch help within minutes. We have emergency rooms open 24 hours. We have created an entire infrastructure of safety that operates invisibly, constantly, protecting us during every moment, including the moments when we're most vulnerable. We have created a world where night is just darker day, where we move through the hours of darkness without fundamentally changing how we behave or how we think about safety. We drive at night. We walk at night. We work at night. We shop at night. Night is just another time slot in our continuous modern existence. That world, our world, is built on the foundation laid by people like Thomas, people who walked cold corridors, people who sacrificed sleep and comfort, and sometimes their lives to maintain the barrier between order and chaos. According to Dr. Roger Eckert's extensive research documented in his book At Day's Close, the medieval fear of night wasn't irrational superstition. It was based on genuine statistical reality. You were 30 times more likely to be a victim of violent crime after dark. Fires were exponentially more dangerous at night because they couldn't be seen and fought as effectively. Animals were more aggressive in darkness. Disease spread more easily in the crowded, dark conditions where medieval people live. Every fear that drove Thomas to walk his rounds, that kept him alert through 12 hours of cold darkness, was grounded in observable, documented danger. But here is what is beautiful about Thomas's story, what makes it meaningful and inspiring rather than just depressing. They walked anyway. Thomas and every watchman like him knew the dangers. They lived those dangers every single night for years. They understood exactly what they were risking, and they still lit their lanterns, picked up their rattles, checked their daggers, and stepped into the darkness. That is courage. Not the kind of courage that wins battles or earns medals. Not the kind of courage that gets written into history books or celebrated in songs. The quiet courage of showing up. The steady courage of doing necessary work that most people never see and rarely appreciate. Let me tell you about the last insight I gained from following Thomas's story, from studying the records and accounts, and trying to understand what this life was really like. This isn't in the historical documents. This is interpretation, inference, an attempt to understand what these people felt and thought. But I believe it is true because it fits everything we know about who Thomas was and what he did. Thomas said, or would have said if I'd been able to ask him, that the hardest part of night watch wasn't the danger, wasn't the cold or the exhaustion or the fear of attack. It was the loneliness. It was the knowledge that while he walked, everyone else slept, everyone else dreamed, everyone else experienced the comfort and rest that he provided but never received during those hours. He was outside the normal human cycle, awake when he should be sleeping, alert when he should be dreaming, working when he should be resting. This separation from the normal rhythms of life was, in his mind, like being half alive, like being a ghost that watches life but can't quite touch it. But Thomas also experienced something else, something that made the sacrifice worthwhile despite the hardship. There were moments during the watch when he felt more alive than at any other time. Moments when the castle was silent and the stars were bright and he was alone at the top of a tower looking out over a sleeping world. Moments when he felt like the only conscious person in the universe, the only witness to the profound mystery of night. These moments were rare but powerful. They were moments of connection to something larger than himself. Something he couldn't name but could feel. This is what I mean when I say that Thomas's job was about more than security. It was about bearing witness to the night. It was about standing in the darkness so that others didn't have to. It was about transforming fear into vigilance, vulnerability into protection, isolation into service. It was about taking something terrifying and overwhelming foedy, the medieval night with all its dangers thide, and making it survivable through sheer human determination. The sun is fully up now in our story. Thomas has finished his watch. He is walking out of the castle, down to the town, back to his own small house where his wife and daughters are awake and waiting for him. He is exhausted. His feet hurt. His eyes are gritty with fatigue. The scar on his head aches when the wind touches it, but he is satisfied. He kept everyone safe another night, and in about 8 hours after sleeping through the day, he'll do it all again. As we come to the end of this journey, I want you to think about something. Tonight, when you are lying in bed in the darkness that is not really dark because of streetlights and electronics, and all the tiny lights that fill our modern nights, maybe you'll hear sounds you can't immediately identify. A creak from the house settling, a car passing on the street outside, the wind in the trees, the hum of the refrigerator. the click of the heater turning on. For just a moment, try to imagine what those sounds would mean if you didn't have all the safety systems that protect you. No locks that actually work, no police you can call, no phones at all, no neighbours close enough to hear if you screamed, no streetlights making it impossible for anyone to approach unseen, no fire department that can arrive in minutes, no emergency rooms, no safety net at all. Just you and the darkness and the unknown threats that might be lurking. That is the world Thomas lived in. That is the world medieval people navigated every single night. And they didn't just survive it, they mastered it as much as it could be mastered. They created systems and protocols and strategies for managing danger. They built castles with progressive security. They trained watchmen to superhuman levels of vigilance. They developed coping mechanisms for managing fear. They turned the terrifying mystery of night into something that could be endured, managed, survived. Thomas took responsibility for protecting 300 people every single night for 7 years. That is over 2,500 nights of walking dark corridors, checking locked doors, listening for threats, being ready to raise the alarm or fight or die if necessary. That is over 2,500 nights of choosing duty over comfort, choosing service over safety, choosing to be the barrier between order and chaos. The medieval castle wasn't really about walls and towers and military strength, though those things mattered. It was about people like Thomas, like Margaret, like Brother Martin, like all the others we've met tonight. People who did their jobs with dedication and skill, people who cared for their families and communities, people who looked out for their neighbours and tried to make tomorrow slightly better than today. That is the real story of medieval life, the real story of human history, not the grand battles or famous kings or dramatic events. The small, daily acts of courage and kindness and responsibility that allowed civilization to continue. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey into the darkness. Thank you for walking the watch with Thomas, for feeling his fear and his courage, for understanding the weight of his responsibility. These stories matter. These lives matter. Not because they're dramatic or unusual, but precisely because they're not. This is how most humans have lived throughout most of history, doing necessary work, facing genuine dangers, showing up every day to do jobs that needed doing. Remembering these stories, honoring these lives, helps us understand our own lives better. It helps us appreciate the infrastructure of safety we've built. It helps us recognize that every peaceful night is built on the work of people we never meet and rarely thank. Police officers, security guards, night shift workers, emergency responders, and all the people who work while we sleep, who make our modern world of safety and comfort possible. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, I want you to remember Thomas walking his rounds. Remember that somewhere in history, someone kept watch so others could rest. Someone stood between safety and danger. Someone held back the night. And in a way, people are still doing that job today, in different forms with different tools, but with the same fundamental purpose. Sweet dreams, and may you wake feeling grateful for all the people, past and present, who guard your rest. May you wake with a deeper appreciation for the simple luxury of sleeping through the night without fear, a luxury that humans struggled for thousands of years to achieve. And may you wake knowing that every peaceful night is built on the vigilance and sacrifice of people you'll never meet but whose work shapes every moment of your life. The next time you feel safe in the darkness, the next time you walk through your house at night without terror, the next time you sleep soundly from sunset to sunrise, remember that this wasn't always possible. Remember Thomas of Brecon and the thousands like him who walked dark corridors so others could dream in peace. I can't wait to share the next chapter of history with you. Until then, rest well, dream peacefully, and remember, even in the darkest night, there are those who keep watch. Good night.